Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome to part 9 of What If I Was Reborn into the world of Avatar as the Prince Zuko and took over the world. Let the tale begin. Chapter 81, The Devil's Bargain. The high of his triumph over the ventilation system lasted for a glorious, uncomplicated hour. Sokka felt like he was walking on air, a feeling entirely separate from Aang's airbending. He had solved something. He had used his own brain, his own unique way of seeing the world, and it had worked. The Mechanist had looked at him not as a kid, but as a peer. It was a heady, powerful feeling. But as the initial buzz faded, Sokka's natural-born skepticism, the part of him that was always on watch, began to reassert itself. He wandered the workshop, now seeing it with new eyes. Not just as a place of wonder, but as a place of excess. His gaze snagged on a stack of metal plates leaning against a wall. They weren't the rough, hand-hammered iron the refugees used for their own tools and repairs. These were perfectly rolled, uniform sheets of high-quality steel, the kind produced only in the massive forges of the Fire Nation. A lot of it. A cold trickle of doubt started in his gut. He moved to a rack of blueprints, his eyes scanning past the designs for water wheels and improved pulleys. One large vellum sheet, half hidden beneath others, depicted something else entirely, a complex, armored vehicle on treads, with a massive, snub-nosed cannon mounted on its front. It was labeled, Mark IV Land Assault Vehicle, Armored. Another showed a detailed cross-section of a massive drill head. These weren't tools for a peaceful community. These were engines of war. The trickle of doubt became a flood of icy certainty. His heart, which had been so light, now felt like a stone in his chest. He remembered the sheer quality of the materials, the advanced nature of some designs he'd glimpsed but hadn't fully processed. This wasn't just scavenging. This was a supply line. He found the Mechanist in a secluded corner of the workshop, hunched over a smaller, more intricate drawing. He was so absorbed he didn't hear Sokka approach. "These are Fire Nation designs," Sokka said, his voice flat and hard, all the previous warmth gone. The Mechanist jumped, his hand flying to cover the blueprint. He looked up, and the guilt that flashed in his eyes was all the confirmation Sokka needed. "What?" "No, my boy, these are just theoretical concepts," the Mechanist stammered, a terrible, transparent lie. For defense." "Defense?" Sokka's voice rose, cutting through the workshop's hum. He grabbed the land assault vehicle blueprint and thrust it forward. "This is a tank. This isn't for scaring off wolf bats. And that steel? That's not from some Earth Kingdom mine. That's Fire Nation forged. You're building weapons for them?" The few assistants in earshot had stopped working, their faces pale and tense. The friendly, collaborative atmosphere shattered, replaced by a thick, terrified silence. The Mechanist's shoulders slumped. The energetic, brilliant inventor vanished, replaced by a tired, frightened old man. "Sokka, please, you don't understand the situation," he pleaded, his voice low and desperate. "You have to be quiet. I understand that you're helping the people who are wiping out the rest of the world." Sokka shot back, his anger fueled by a crushing sense of betrayal. "I understand that you're a traitor to everyone who isn't Fire Nation. How could you? These people look up to you. Teo thinks you're a hero. Don't you think I know that?" The Mechanist's voice broke, a raw, pained sound. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I enjoy creating these monstrosities?" It was at that moment that the main workshop door swung open. Aang, Katara, and Teo walked in, their faces still flushed with the joy and freedom of their flight. Teo was in the middle of animatedly describing a complex aerial maneuver to Aang, his laughter dying in his throat as he took in the scene. The air in the room was frozen. Sokka, trembling with fury, standing over the Mechanist, who looked utterly defeated. The unrolled blueprint of the Fire Nation tank lay between them like a declaration of war. "What's going on?" Aang asked, his cheerful expression melting into one of confusion and concern. "Sokka? Why are you yelling?" Teo rolled his chair forward, his brow furrowed with worry. "Dad? What's happening?" What is that? His eyes fell on the blueprint. Even he, with his limited knowledge of war, could see it was a weapon. A terrible one. Sokka pointed a shaking finger at the mechanist. Ask him. Ask him what he's really building here. Go on, tell them. Tell your son what you do when everyone else is asleep. The mechanist looked from Sokka's furious face to Aang's confused one, to Katara's growing horror, and finally, to his own son's wide, trusting eyes. The weight of his secret finally broke him. He sank onto a stool, his head in his hands. They found us, he whispered, the words muffled. A year ago. A Fire Nation scouting party. They saw the smoke, just as you did. They climbed the peaks, just as you did. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and full of a bottomless grief. Their commander, a man named Rio, stood right where you are standing, Avatar. He gave me a choice. It wasn't a choice at all. His voice trembled. He said I could put my genius to work for the Fire Lord, or he would burn this temple to the ground with every single man, woman, and child inside. He would have done it. I saw it in his eyes. There would have been no mercy. The horror that dawned on their faces was a physical thing. Katara brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Teo stared at his father as if seeing a stranger, the color draining from his face. So you just agreed? Aang's voice was small, disbelieving. You help them? You build weapons they use to hurt people? To destroy other villages, other families? What else could I do? The mechanist cried out, his plea echoing in the silent workshop. Let them all die. Let Teo die. Was I supposed to be a hero and let my son be murdered for a principle? This was the only way. The only way to keep everyone safe. I hate it. Every gear I turn for them, every design I sketch, it feels like I'm carving a piece of my own soul out. But I do it. Because the moment I stop, the Fire Nation returns, and they will show no mercy. We are alive because I agreed to become their slave. He turned his agonized gaze to Teo. Do you think I wanted you to grow up in a place like this? A beautiful cage built on a deal with a monster? Everything I have built for our people, every comfort, every innovation, is just a pretty cage. And the price for this cage, the price is my conscience. The price is helping the very nation that would have killed you without a second thought. Teo was crying now, silent tears tracking through the dust on his cheeks. The image of his brilliant, kind father, the man who built gliders to give him the sky, was now superimposed with the image of a collaborator, a man who designed machines of death to buy their lives. The cognitive dissonance was too much. He looked shattered. Aang felt the world tilt. The fragile peace he had just found, the connection with Teo, the acceptance of this changed home, it all crumbled to ash. The Fire Nation wasn't just a distant enemy. Its shadow was here, in this sacred place. It had its claws deep in the heart of his sanctuary, and it was using the kindness of a father to fuel its cruelty. The horror was so profound he couldn't even find words. Katara found her voice first, thick with tears and rage. You think you're protecting them? You're feeding the beast that will eventually come for everyone else. You're helping them become stronger so they can do to other families what they threatened to do to yours. How can you live with that? Because the alternative is watching my family die, the mechanist roared, finally breaking, his composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. What would you have me do? What would any of you have done? Would you have chosen death for everyone you love? The question hung in the air, monstrous and unanswerable. There was no good answer. There was only the devastating reality of the mechanist's bargain, a deal made in hell to keep a sliver of heaven alive. The joy of the day was dead, replaced by the chilling, inescapable truth of war, and the terrible, soul-crushing choices it forced upon good people. Chapter 82, The Price of a Life. The silence in the workshop was heavier than any stone, thick with the ruins of trust and the ashes of a terrible truth. The mechanist's confession hadn't just been words, it had been a seismic event, cracking open the foundation of their little world on the mountain. The joyous, inventive sanctuary was now revealed as a gilded cage, and its chief architect was its most miserable prisoner. Teo was the first to break. The tears were gone, replaced by a hollowed-out look of profound disappointment that was far worse. All this time, Teo whispered, his voice raspy. He wasn't looking at his father, but at the glider he still held in his lap, the very symbol of his freedom. You built me this. You gave me the sky. But the whole time, you were chaining us to the ground. You were lying to me. To everyone. The mechanist flinched as it struck. Teo, my boy. I never lied to protect you. To keep you safe. You lied by omission. Teo's voice cracked, finally looking at his father, his eyes blazing with a pain that was years in the making. Every time you said you were working late, every time you looked tired and said it was a complex problem, it was this. You were building a weapon for the people who would have killed me. How is that keeping me safe? It just makes our safety dirty. It is dirty, the mechanist cried out, his hands trembling as he gestured around the workshop. It is the dirtiest, most vile thing I have ever done. Do you think I don't wake up every night with the schematics of those machines burning behind my eyes? I see the faces of the people they will be used against. I see mothers and children, just like the ones here. I am building the very instruments of their destruction to save my own son. There is no clean hands in this, Teo. There is only survival. Katara, who had been holding onto Aang's arm for support, found her voice, though it was thick with emotion. Survival at what cost? You're right, there are no clean hands. But your hands are building the weapons that will stain the entire Earth Kingdom with blood. My mother, she choked on the words, my mother died protecting me from the Fire Nation. She didn't collaborate. She stood her ground. And she is dead, the mechanist shot back, his face a mask of agony. Forgive me, child, but I am not that strong. I am a father and an inventor, not a soldier. I cannot bury my son for a principle. I will not. Aang had been quiet, the storm inside him too vast for words. He looked from Teo's shattered face to the mechanist's desperate one. He saw the impossible choice. This wasn't like fighting Zuko. This was a sickness, a rot that had taken root out of love and fear. How could he fight that? When? Aang asked, his voice quiet but cutting through the argument. Everyone turned to look at him. When are they coming back? The mechanist seemed to deflate further, the fight going out of him. He wiped a hand over his face. Soon. A supply ship is due in 3 days. They come to collect the latest designs and deliver more materials. Rio himself often leads the inspection. He enjoys reminding me of our arrangement. 3 days, Sokka repeated, his mind, so recently alight with the joy of engineering, now clicking into a different, more familiar gear, the gear of a warrior, a strategist. The betrayal still stung, a hot coal in his chest, but the practical part of him was already pushing past the anger. Anger wouldn't solve this. A plan would. He looked at the mechanist, not with fury anymore, but with a calculating intensity. So, they come here. They walk right into your home. They think they have you completely under their thumb. The mechanist nodded miserably. Yes. They are arrogant. They believe their threat is enough to keep me compliant forever. Good, Sokka said, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf seal that has spotted a weakness in the ice. Let them be arrogant. He stepped into the center of the room, his presence suddenly commanding. You said it yourself. You're an inventor. A problem solver. Well, we have a new problem. The Fire Nation is a leaky pipe in your ventilation system. And we're not going to just live with the fumes anymore. We're going to fix it. Permanently. Aang's eyes met Sokka's, and a spark of understanding passed between them. The Airbender stood up straighter, the confusion and grief in his eyes hardening into resolve. Sokka's right. This ends now. Their influence here ends. This is still a sacred place. I won't let them poison it anymore. But how? The mechanist asked, a flicker of his old intelligence returning, mixed with a desperate hope. They have a full complement of soldiers. Firebenders. If we fight them and fail. We won't fail, Aang said, and there was a weight to his words, the echo of the Avatar speaking. Because we're not going to fight them on their terms. We're going to use your home against them. We're going to use everything you've built here. Sokka was already pacing, his fingers tracing imaginary lines in the air. They come up the main path, right? They expect a welcoming committee of one scared inventor. They won't be expecting us. We have the high ground. We have the terrain. We have your machines. He stopped and looked at the mechanist, his gaze sharp. And most importantly, we have the element of surprise. They think you're broken. They have no idea that you've just gotten yourself some new consultants. He turned to the group, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. We don't meet them head on. We set a trap. We turn this entire temple into a weapon. We use the very things the mechanists built for them, and we use the things that make this place unique. The height. The wind. The unpredictability. Aang nodded, a fierce light in his gray eyes. The pacifist was gone, replaced by a guardian. No one else gets hurt because of this place. No one from the Fire Nation is going to use my home to spread more pain. We stop them here. We cut the head off the snake. He looked at Rio's name with a coldness they had rarely seen. This Commander Rio, he won't know what hit him. The mechanist looked from Sokka's determined face to Aang's resolute one, to Katara's grim nod, and finally, to his son. Teo was still hurt, the betrayal a fresh wound, but he gave his father a small, slow nod. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a chance. A chance to fight back. A chance to be the hero Teo had always believed him to be. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on the mechanist's cheek. It was a tear of shame, of fear, but also of a fragile, terrifying hope. All right, he whispered, his voice firming with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. All right. Let's build a trap. Chapter 83, The Trap and the Tiger. The air on the temple peak was thin and sharp as a blade, carrying the scent of old snow and impending confrontation. Every creak of a pulley, every whisper of the wind through the modified spires, felt amplified. The trap was set. It was a masterpiece of Sokka's strategic mind and the mechanist's inventive genius, a symphony of tension waiting for its first note. From their hidden vantage point behind a carved stone screen, Aang, Sokka, Katara, Teo, and the mechanist watched the narrow mountain path. The refugees were in their positions, hidden in the rafters, behind false walls, their hands gripping levers and ropes instead of tools. The cheerful, industrious hum of the temple was gone, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Then, they came. A column of Fire Nation soldiers, perhaps 24 strong, marched with disciplined arrogance up the winding path. Their crimson armor was a bloody scar against the pale gray stone. At their head walked a man Sokka had never seen before, the new officer. He was tall and rigid, with a lean, predatory face and a topkunk so severe it seemed to pull the skin taut around his cold, calculating eyes. His name, they had learned, was Commander Rio. He carried no weapon visibly, but his posture screamed of a firebender's lethal confidence. Steady, Sokka whispered, his voice barely a breath. Wait for my signal. The massive, iron-bound main gates of the temple, which usually stood open in a hollow gesture of welcome, were shut. Commander Rio stopped before them, his lip curling in disdain. He didn't bother to knock. He simply raised a hand and a soldier stepped forward, hammering a fist against the wood. Mechanist, the soldier barked. Open up! Commander Rio is here for his inspection. A long, tense moment passed. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the gates swung inward just enough to reveal the mechanist, standing alone in the vast entrance courtyard. He looked smaller than ever, wringing his hands, his face a mask of practiced, terrified obedience. "See Commander Rio," the mechanist stammered, bowing low. "Welcome. The latest schematics are ready for your review." Rio strode forward, his soldiers filing in behind him and fanning out, their eyes scanning the seemingly empty balconies and silent archways. The courtyard felt like a stage. "The progress is acceptable?" Rio's voice was a low, cold thing, devoid of any interest in the answer. It was a demand for confirmation, not a question. "Why yes, Commander. The improvements to the ballista's firing mechanism are complete. The rate of fire has increased by 20%. The mechanist's performance was flawless, every tremor in his voice genuine, born of a year of living under this man's shadow." "Good," Rio said, his gaze sweeping over the temple with open contempt. "A pity such ingenuity is wasted on a nest of earth-loving vermin. But you serve a purpose. Continue to serve it, and you may yet keep your community." He gestured dismissively. "Now, the designs." This was the moment. Sokka, from his hiding spot, gave a sharp, downward chop of his hand. The world erupted into beautiful, controlled chaos. There was no battle cry, no screaming charge. The temple itself came alive. From high above, massive nets, weighted with stone and woven from impossibly strong vines, dropped from the eaves, enveloping a whole squad of soldiers before they could even raise their hands to bend. Sections of the floor, cleverly designed by the mechanist to look solid, swung downward on silent hinges, swallowing another group into a dark pit filled with a non-lethal but incredibly sticky resin. From hidden slots in the walls, pressurized hoses, a modified irrigation system, shot out jets of water, not to injure, but to slicken the stone floor, sending firebenders skidding and stumbling, their footing lost before their flames could even ignite. Commander Rio reacted with the speed of a cornered viper. He spun, fire erupting from his fists and feet in a defensive arc, vaporizing a net meant for him. His eyes, wide with a fury that eclipsed his earlier coldness, scanned the chaos, looking for a target. "Treachery," he roared, his voice echoing. "You've signed your own death warrants, you fools." He located the mechanist, who had scrambled back towards the main hall. You did this? I will burn this temple to the ground around you." He lunged forward, but his boots found no purchase on the treacherously wet stone. He stumbled, and in that split second, a figure dropped from the shadows of a high archway, landing between him and the mechanist with the silence of a falling leaf. It was Aang. He didn't assume a bending stance. He simply stood there, his glider staff in his hand, his gray eyes calm but filled with a terrifying, ancient resolve. The air around him stilled, the chaotic noises of the trapped soldiers seeming to fade into a dull background hum. "It's over," Aang said, his voice not loud, but carrying an undeniable weight that cut through Rio's rage. "Your threat ends here. Today." Rio stared, his fury momentarily frozen by sheer disbelief. "The Avatar," he breathed, a greedy, hateful light igniting in his eyes. "Here. The mechanist's work is more valuable than I thought." "This isn't about the mechanist," Aang said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "This is about you. And the war you represent." He spread his arms, encompassing the temple, the trapped soldiers, the watching, hopeful faces of the refugees peeking from their hiding places. "This is a place of peace. It was, and it will be again. I let the war go on for too long, hoping it would pass me by. But it's everywhere. It's in the water, it's in the earth, and it's here, in this sacred air." He planted his staff on the ground with a definitive thud. "I am the Avatar. And I'm done running. I'm done hiding. I'm ending this war. And it starts with you. It starts right here, right now. You will leave this mountain. You will tell your Fire Lord that his free labor is over. And you will know that the world's fight back begins today." It was a declaration. Not just to Rio, but to the universe. Aang stood as the center of the world, his will a palpable force. Commander Rio, for all his bluster and fire, seemed to shrink before the 12-year-old boy. The remaining, untrapped soldiers, seeing their commander hesitating, seeing their comrades immobilized, felt their will to fight crumble. One by one, they dropped their weapons, the clatter of steel on stone a final, surrendering rhythm. Rio's shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the bitter taste of absolute defeat. He was captured, his mission a catastrophic failure. A wave of relieved, triumphant cheers began to rise from the refugees. Katara and Sokka emerged from hiding, grinning. Teo rolled forward, his face alight with pride and vindication. They moved to secure the prisoners, using the mechanist's strong ropes to bind the hands of Rio and his remaining men. The trap had worked perfectly. As two refugees tightened the ropes around Commander Rio's wrists, he glared pure hatred at Aang. "This isn't over, Avatar. The Fire Lord will hear of this. He will send a legion. He will burn this mountain to cinders." Aang met his gaze, unflinching. From among the group of bound soldiers, a quiet, melodic, and utterly chilling voice spoke. "You think you can capture me?" Every head turned. One of the smaller, seemingly ordinary soldiers, their helmet pulled low, was smiling. Before anyone could react, she flexed her wrists. A burst of intense, searing blue flame erupted from her hands, vaporizing the thick ropes in an instant. She stood up, pulling off the helmet and shaking out a cascade of perfect black hair. Princess Azula smiled, her golden eyes gleaming with predatory amusement. The courtyard froze. The triumph of a moment ago shattered into a million pieces of pure dread. This was not the agreed time, Azula, another voice, low and laced with irritation, cut through the stunned silence. Another soldier, this one taller, stood up. He brought his own hands together, and a concussive blast of normal orange fire burned away his bindings. He removed his helmet, revealing a face marked by a brutal scar and eyes burning with a familiar, relentless fire. Prince Zuko stared across the courtyard, his gaze locking not on Azula, but directly on Aang. "Long time, Aang." Chapter 84, A Sister's Wrath. The silence that followed Zuko's words, "Long time, Aang," was absolute and brittle, ready to shatter. It was a silence filled with the echoes of a shared spirit world, a palace bargain, and a mutual, grudging understanding that now hung by a thread. In the space of a single breath, a dozen unspoken questions passed between the Avatar and the prince. It was Azula who, predictably, shattered the stillness. A slow, delighted smile spread across her face, a predator finally loosed upon its prey. "Well, isn't this a perfect little reunion?" she purred, her voice dripping with venomous glee. She cracked her neck, a series of sharp, precise pops. The Avatar, his water tribe peasant and her brother, and a cripple. All gathered for the slaughter. "You've led us on quite a chase, Avatar. But all games must end." Azula, Zuko's voice was a low warning, a note of genuine caution. He knew what was coming. He had to play his part, the concerned brother, the strategic prince, while secretly setting the board for his own endgame. "Oh, don't fret, Zuzu," she said, not taking her eyes off Aang. "I'll be gentle." "Relatively." Her gaze then flicked to Katara, and the mask of amusement slipped, revealing the raw, seething contempt beneath. "I've been looking forward to a rematch with you, little girl." Before anyone could move, Azula exploded into action. It wasn't a run, it was a fluid, terrifyingly graceful launch. She didn't bend fire first, she bent space itself, closing the distance between them in a blur of motion. Aang reacted instantly, a blast of air shooting from his palms, but Azula was already gone, using the force of his own attack to propel herself into a spinning backflip. As she flipped, twin jets of precise, searing blue fire shot from her heels, forcing Aang to throw up an earthen wall with a stomp of his foot. "Is that all?" Azula taunted, landing soundlessly on a high, broken pillar. "The great Avatar, hiding behind dirt?" Sokka yelled, charging forward with his club. Azula didn't even look at him. With a flick of her wrist, a whip-like strand of blue flame snapped out, wrapping around his weapon and yanking it from his grasp, sending it clattering across the stone. A second, concussive burst from her palm sent him flying backwards, skidding to a halt at Katara's feet. "Sokka!" Katara cried, her hands already moving, drawing moisture from the air to form her water whips. "Don't bother," Azula sneered, and with a series of rapid, pinpoint fire blasts, she superheated the stone at Katara's feet, the steam hissing violently and disrupting her stance, causing the water to fall harmlessly to the ground. She was toying with them. A whirlwind of azure fire and impossible agility. She moved like liquid lightning, striking from every angle, her attacks not just powerful, but surgically precise, designed to humiliate and disarm. She used the temple's verticality against them, leaping from pillar to archway, raining down fire that forced them into a desperate, scattered defense. Aang was a flurry of air and earth, but he was reactive. Always a half-step behind her relentless, unpredictable assault. Throughout it all, Zuko stood with his arms crossed, a statue of cold observation. His face was an unreadable mask, but his mind was racing, calculating every move. "See, Zuko?" Azula called out, her voice bright and mocking as she effortlessly dodged a slab of earth Aang hurled at her. She landed in a perfect, balanced crouch, not a hair out of place. This is how it's done. No grand speeches. No complicated traps. Just pure, overwhelming power and skill. I don't need your soldiers. I don't need your plans. I certainly don't need you getting in my way. She launched herself at Aang again, this time a direct, brutal assault. She feinted high with a jet of fire from her right hand, and as Aang blocked it, her left leg snapped out in a low, sweeping kick that sent a crescent of blue flame towards his ankles. Aang leaped, but she was already in the air with him, a spinning vortex of fire forcing him to encase himself in a ball of air, deflecting the attack but sending him crashing hard onto the stone floor, dazed. "He's finished," Azula declared, landing gracefully and striding towards the stunned Avatar. She raised a hand, blue energy coalescing into a deadly, focused point. "The Fire Lord will be so pleased. I do hope you'll give him my regards when you see him in the spirit world." This was the moment. The threat was real, the killing intent palpable. "Azula, wait!" Zuko's command cut through the air, sharp and authoritative. She paused, her head tilting. "What is it now? Don't tell me you've grown sentimental." "Sentiment has nothing to do with it," Zuko retorted, his voice dripping with cold pragmatism. He gestured to the surrounding temple, to the watching, terrified faces of the Mechanist and Teo peeking from behind rubble. "This is a strategic asset. The Avatar is a prize to be presented to our father, not incinerated in a fit of pique on a mountaintop. His knowledge, his very existence, is a weapon. You destroy the weapon, you lose the war." He took a step forward, his golden eyes locking with hers. "Or are you so desperate for a petty, personal victory that you throw away the greatest advantage the Fire Nation has had in a century?" The barb struck home. Azula's eyes narrowed, the blue fire at her fingertips flickering. She despised his logic because it was correct. Killing Aang here would be satisfying, but delivering him alive to Ozai, that was true power. That was restoration. She lowered her hands slightly, the killing energy dissipating. "Fine. We take him alive. But the others," her gaze swept over Katara, who was helping a groaning Sokka to his feet, and Teo. "Are redundant. Especially her. The waterbender is his primary emotional attachment," Zuko countered, his tone that of a tactician analyzing a battlefield. "She is a lever. You remove the lever, and the prize becomes exponentially harder to move. The brother is a further guarantee of her compliance. The cripple is irrelevant, but harmless. We take them all." He didn't wait for her agreement. He turned to the stunned Fire Nation soldiers, who had been watching the display of royal sibling rivalry with terror. "You heard me. Secure the prisoners. Bind the Avatar's hands and feet with triple-layered chains. He is not to be harmed further. The others are to be tied and gagged." "Move! The soldiers, jolted into action by the direct command of their crown prince, scrambled forward. They roughly pulled Aang's limp form up, beginning to wrap thick, metal-reinforced ropes around his wrists. Another pair moved towards Katara and Sokka. Azula watched, a simmering pot of resentment. She had won the fight, but Zuko was seizing control of the victory. He was dictating terms, framing her triumph within his own narrative. She had shown him her power, and he had used it, contained it, and made it his own. As the soldiers worked, Zuko stood over Aang's unconscious form, his expression unreadable. The first part of his plan was complete. The players were in position. Now, he just had to wait for the right moment to spring the trap he had been building since they left the Fire Nation capital. The real game was just beginning. The soldiers finished their work with efficient, grim silence. Aang was bound in heavy chains, his head lolling. Katara, Sokka, and Teo had their hands tied behind their backs, their faces a mixture of fury, fear, and despair. The initial shock of the royal siblings' arrival was now replaced by the cold, hard reality of their captivity. Azula watched the proceedings with a smirk of satisfaction, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She was still simmering from Zuko's intervention. "Satisfied, brother?" she asked, her voice a silken blade. "We have our trophies. Though I fail to see why we need the extra baggage. The girl is a liability. A reminder of your sentimental phase." Zuko turned from observing the prisoners, his gaze landing on Azula with an intensity that made the air between them crackle. The casual, observing prince was gone, replaced by the crown prince in full, chilling command. "Your short-sightedness is going to lose us this war, Azula," he said, his voice low but carrying through the ruined courtyard. It wasn't a shout, it was a pronouncement, and it was far more terrifying. Azula's smirk vanished. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Zuko continued, taking a deliberate step toward her. The Fire Nation soldiers froze, unsure whether to watch or find somewhere to hide. "You are about to make the single greatest strategic blunder in Fire Nation history, all because you let your emotions control you. Your pride. Your petty need for a clean, flashy kill." He gestured dismissively at the unconscious Aang. "You think killing him is about power? About a trophy for father? You are thinking like an assassin, not an heir to an empire. Enlighten me, then, O wise prince," Azula spat, her hands curling into fists at her sides, blue sparks dancing between her fingers. "Killing him," Zuko said, enunciating every word with brutal clarity, "would mean the Fire Nation losing the fucking war." A stunned silence fell, broken only by the crackle of a dying fire. Even Katara and Sokka, in their bound state, stared at Zuko, utterly confused. "What are you talking about?" Azula demanded, her confidence momentarily shaken by the sheer conviction in his tone. "The Avatar cycle, Azula," Zuko explained, his voice laced with a condescending patience that he knew would infuriate her. "Or did you sleep through that lesson in history? You kill the air nomad Avatar, and the spirit is reborn. Into a fucking waterbender." He let that hang in the air for a moment, his golden eyes sweeping over the captured group, ensuring they were all listening, that they all understood the depth of his calculation. "Where?" Zuko continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "The North Pole, which we will be besieging. The South Pole, which we have pacified. Or some hidden swamp tribe, some isolated village in the Earth Kingdom that we have no knowledge of? We would have to scour the entire world, and by the time we found the new Avatar, he would no longer be a child. He would be protected. Nurtured. The entire water tribe, north and south, would rally around him. He would not be alone and untrained, like this one was. He would be a symbol around which our enemies would unite." The truth of his words landed on everyone present like a physical blow. The mechanist, watching from the shadows, felt a chill. This was not the reckless boy he had heard tales of. This was a strategist who thought in generations, not in battles. Zuko turned his gaze back to Azula, who was now staring at him, her expression unreadable, the anger replaced by a cold, calculating assessment. "The only way to win," Zuko stated, his final point, a hammer blow, is to break the cycle. To end the Avatar spirit, once and for all. And nobody, not you, not me, not even Father, not even the fire sages knows how to do that. Yet. He let the word yet hang in the air, a promise and a threat. So no, Azula, he concluded, his voice returning to its normal, cold timbre. We do not kill the Avatar. We use him. We break him. We learn from him. And when we have extracted every ounce of his value, then we will discover how to make his death permanent. Until that day, he is the most valuable and most dangerous prisoner in the world. And you are about to throw that away for a moment of personal satisfaction. The difference between the two siblings was now starkly clear to everyone. Azula was a brilliant, unstoppable force, a master of immediate, overwhelming power. But Zuko was playing a different game entirely. He was thinking about the soul of the world, the flow of history, and the absolute, final victory. The soldiers looked at him with a new, profound respect, and a flicker of fear. They saw not just a prince, but a future Fire Lord who saw the entire world as his chessboard. Azula said nothing. She merely held his gaze, her mind undoubtedly racing, recalculating her own position in light of his devastating logic. The victory she had felt moments ago was now ashes in her mouth, replaced by the bitter taste of being outmaneuvered on a level she hadn't even considered. Chapter 85, The Spoils of War. The descent from the Northern Air Temple was a somber, silent procession, a stark contrast to the explosive chaos that had preceded it. The wind, once a playground for gliders, now bit with a bitter chill, carrying the scent of ozone and defeat for the captured, and the sterile aroma of victory for the captors. Prince Zuko led the way, his posture rigid, a black silhouette against the gray stone of the mountain. He did not look back at his prisoners. His focus was forward, on the next move in the intricate game he was playing. Behind him, Princess Azula walked with a measured, predatory grace, her hands clasped behind her back. The air around her was cold, a contained storm of resentment and recalibration. She had been publicly schooled, and every soldier in the column could feel the tension radiating from her. The prisoners were marched in the center of the formation. Aang, still unconscious, was slung over the shoulders of two burly firebenders, his small form looking utterly fragile wrapped in the heavy, clinking chains. Katara and Sokka walked with their hands bound, their faces set in masks of defiant fury, though the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. Teo was pushed along in his wheelchair by a stoic soldier, his head bowed, the joy of flight now a distant, painful memory. It was Commander Rio, the officer whose operation Zuko had so decisively usurped, who finally broke the silence, falling into step just behind the prince. "Your Highness," Rio began, his voice carefully neutral, "the nearest secure facility is Firebase Kaze, a day's march to the east. It's a high-altitude outpost, built into the mountains. Easily defensible, and remote enough to avoid prying eyes." Zuko didn't break his stride. "You have command of the garrison there?" "Yes, Your Highness. A full company. We have secure holding cells, capable of restraining exceptional individuals." Rio's gaze flickered towards the unconscious Aang. "Good," Zuko stated, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "You will take the lead. Secure the prisoners in the most fortified cell. They are to be kept together for now. The Avatar is to be monitored at all times. If he so much as twitches in a way you don't like, you are to sedate him immediately. Is that understood?" The command was a test, a deliberate delegation of immense responsibility. Zuko was elevating Rio, granting him a crucial role in this monumental capture, and in doing so, binding the commander's loyalty directly to him. Rio's spine straightened almost imperceptibly. "Perfectly, Your Highness. It will be done." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "And their treatment? The other prisoners?" Zuko's voice was like ice. "They are to be kept alive and unharmed. They are leverage. The waterbender, especially, is not to be touched. Her well-being is directly tied to the Avatar's cooperation. Any soldier who forgets that will answer to me personally. The unspoken threat hung in the thin air, more effective than any shouted order. Rio simply bowed his head. As you command. He then turned, his voice sharpening as he barked orders to the column. You heard the Crown Prince. Double time. I want scouts 500 yards ahead and behind. I want this column to be a ghost. Move! The soldiers, invigorated by the clear chain of command and the gravity of their task, picked up the pace. The clatter of armor and the crunch of boots on stone became a relentless rhythm. From a few paces back, Azula watched the exchange, her lips pressed into a thin line. Zuko was not just managing the capture, he was consolidating power. He was taking Rio, a competent if unremarkable officer, and making him a key player, ensuring his loyalty would lie with the prince who gave him this glory, not the princess who had merely been part of the fight. She glided forward until she was walking beside Zuko, her voice a low, silken murmur meant only for his ears. Delegating so soon, Zuzu? Afraid you can't handle the babysitting duties yourself? Zuko didn't look at her. Efficiency, Azula. Something you appreciate. Rio knows the terrain and the facility. I have just ensured he is personally invested in the success of this mission. His initiative now serves our purpose. Our purpose, she echoed, a hint of a sneer in her tone. It seems your purpose has become remarkably complicated. First, he's a weapon too valuable to break. Now, his friends are precious leverage. One might think you're growing attached. This time, Zuko stopped. He turned his head slowly, his golden eyes meeting hers. The air around them seemed to still, the marching column instinctively giving them a wider berth. Sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. But intelligence is a weapon we must wield. I am thinking 5 steps ahead, Azula, while you are still fixated on the step you just took. The Avatar's spirit is tied to this world through his attachments. Sever those attachments carelessly, and you create a martyr, an unmoored spirit of immense power that we cannot control. Control the attachments, and you control the Avatar. It is not sentiment. It is strategy. The same strategy you failed to grasp on the mountaintop. He held her gaze for a long, challenging moment, forcing her to confront the sheer, cold-blooded logic of his plan. It was a logic that acknowledged the heart, not to cater to it, but to more effectively shackle it. Without another word, Zuko turned and continued walking, leaving Azula standing alone for a heartbeat in the middle of the path. A flicker of something, frustration, respect, pure, undiluted hatred, crossed her features before she smoothed it into her customary mask of disdain and followed. As they marched, the prisoners absorbed the exchange. Katara, her wrists chafing against the ropes, felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. Zuko's words were a chilling reminder that his protection was not born of kindness, but of a ruthless calculus. He saw her not as a person, but as a tool, a key to be used on the lock of Aang's power. And as Firebase Kaze loomed closer on the horizon, a dark speck against the vast, unforgiving mountains. That realization felt more like a prison than any chain could ever be. The path widened slightly as they descended into a rocky gully, the column stretching out. For a brief moment, they were afforded a sliver of privacy, the sounds of marching boots echoing off the stone walls around them. Azula seized it, her voice a low, venomous hiss. Strategy? You call this convoluted babysitting strategy? She kept her eyes forward, her profile a sharp, beautiful mask. You have the Avatar in chains. The one thing that can restore everything I lost. And you're handing him off to a garrison commander and worrying about the emotional well-being of his entourage. Zuko didn't react to her tone. He matched her pace, his own gaze fixed on the path ahead. You agreed to my terms, Azula. My methods, in exchange for my help in restoring your status. Or has your memory failed you along with your position? The deal was for you to help me capture the Avatar, she retorted, her composure cracking for a microsecond. Not to philosophize about his spiritual attachments. I see him captured. I want him delivered to the Fire Lord. My name cleared. My honor restored. It should be that simple. And it will be, Zuko said, his voice utterly calm, a stark contrast to her simmering fury. But it will be done correctly. Permanently. Or did you wish for a repeat of the Nanhai incident? Where a short-term victory leads to a long-term catastrophe. He finally glanced at her, a flicker of cold amusement in his eyes. You think Father will be satisfied with just the boy? He will want to know how we plan to break the cycle. He will want a solution, not just a prisoner. Presenting him with the Avatar is the first step. Presenting him with the means to ensure the Avatar never returns, that is how you secure your place. Not just as a reinstated princess, but as the architect of the Fire Nation's final victory. He was weaving a new layer into their deal, one that appealed directly to her ambition and her understanding of their father's mind. Ozai didn't reward mere success, he rewarded overwhelming, absolute solutions. I am operating, Azula, Zuko continued, his voice dropping, becoming almost conspiratorial, exactly as I said I would. I assumed my partner in this endeavor would possess the foresight to see beyond the immediate prize. I assumed you would be willing to cooperate, to trust in the process that will get your rank and more back. Was I mistaken? It was a masterful manipulation. He was not defending himself, he was questioning her commitment, her worthiness as his ally. He was framing her impatience as a lack of vision. Azula was silent for a long moment, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the gravel. He had backed her into a corner. To disagree was to admit she was short-sighted, that she didn't understand the grander game. To agree was to submit to his leadership in this operation, to acknowledge that his complicated methods had a purpose that served her ultimate goal. You speak of trust, brother, she said finally, her voice regaining its smooth, controlled edge, though it was thinner now, stretched taut. A curious demand, given our history. I speak of mutual interest, he corrected. Our goals are aligned. My methods are the surest path to achieving them. You wanted my help. This is what it looks like. It is not brute force. It is precision. And it requires patience. He let the word hang in the air between them. Patience. The one virtue Azula possessed in scant supply. Very well, she conceded, the words tasting like ash. We do it your way. For now. Her eyes, sharp as daggers, slid towards him. But do not mistake my cooperation for weakness, Zuko. The moment your precision looks like hesitation, the moment I suspect you are losing control of this situation, I will take matters into my own hands. And I will not be as measured. It was a threat, but it was also a capitulation. She was acknowledging his lead, however reluctantly. Noted, Zuko replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk touching his lips before it vanished. He had won this round. He had reaffirmed the terms of their deal, framed his actions as part of a grand, shared strategy, and forced the ever-impatient Azula to accept a slower, more deliberate timeline. He had contained her, for now. As they marched out of the gully and Firebase Kaze came into clearer view, a stark, functional complex of dark stone and metal built into the cliffside, the power dynamic within the Fire Nation contingent had subtly, yet decisively, shifted. The Crown Prince was in command, not just of the soldiers, but of the plan, the prisoners, and his formidable sister. And he was playing a game whose final move only he could see. Chapter 86, Deal Fulfilled. Firebase Kaze was a fist of black iron and dark stone driven into the mountain sternum. There were no banners, no grand archways, only functionality. Watchtowers bristled with ballistae, their cold iron bolts aimed at the passes below. The air was thin, sharp, and carried the constant, low thrum of machinery and disciplined footsteps. It was the perfect place to bury a secret, or a person. The column marched through the main gate, the rhythmic clatter of armored boots echoing in the cavernous entry yard. Commander Rio, his posture rigid with a newfound, grave importance, strode at the head, his voice cutting through the alpine chill as he snapped orders to the garrison. Secure the perimeter. Double the watch on the eastern ridge. I want every approach covered. He was a man elevated, entrusted with the Crown Prince's most vital prize, and he would not be found wanting. Prince Zuko walked a pace behind him, a study in controlled power. His gaze swept over the fortress, not with admiration, but with cold assessment. He noted the sight lines, the choke points, the storage of blasting jelly near the outer wall. He was not just seeing a prison, he was calculating the dimensions of the coming explosion. Princess Azula followed, her expression one of profound, theatrical boredom. She examined her nails as if the entire fortress, the captured Avatar, the triumphant return, was a tedious provincial play. But beneath the lacquer of indifference, her mind was a coiled spring, cataloging every interaction, every subtle shift in authority. She watched Zuko delegate, watched Rio preen, and stored it all away. The prisoners were the heart of this grim procession. Aang was half carried, half dragged by two firebenders, his small form lost in the cruel weight of the chains. Katara and Sokka walked with their hands bound, their faces set in defiance, though a cold dread was settling in their guts. Teo was pushed along in his chair, the vibrant boy who had touched the sky now earthbound and broken. "Take them to the primary containment cell in the lower level," Zuko commanded, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "The one reinforced with platinum alloy." Rio nodded sharply. "At once, Your Highness." He gestured to a squad of his most disciplined men. "You heard the prince. To the brig. Gently with the Avatar, he is not to be further injured." As the soldiers moved to obey, Azula let out a soft, derisive laugh. "How considerate, Zuzu. Such tender care for our guests." Her eyes, sharp as daggers, flicked to Katara. "Especially for the one who warmed your bed. Tell me, does she get a silk pillow to go with her chains? Or was her service not that exceptional?" Katara flinched, her cheeks burning with a mixture of shame and fury. Sokka strained against his bonds. "You shut your mouth." Zuko didn't even look at his sister. "Control your petulance, Azula," he said, his tone flat and dismissive, as if swatting away a fly. "It's unbecoming of a princess. Even a disgraced one." The insult was deliberate, precise. He was needling her, reinforcing the public narrative of her instability, pushing her towards the reaction he needed. He turned his attention back to Rio as the prisoners were led away towards a heavy, iron-bound door that led into the mountain's heart. "They are to be kept together. I want a guard on that door at all times." "And Commander," Zuko paused, ensuring he had the man's full attention, "the waterbender is not to be harmed. She is the key to the Avatar's compliance. Her safety is paramount to my strategy." Rio bowed. "Understood, Your Highness. No one will lay a hand on her." Azula watched the exchange, her smirk not fading, but tightening. She saw the game he was playing. He was building his legend, the strategic, clear-headed prince, while painting her as the volatile, emotional liability. He was laying the groundwork, placing his pieces on the board for the confrontation he was orchestrating. "Oh, brother," she thought, the words a silent, venomous whisper in her mind. "Play your little game. Give your orders. Build your fragile house of cards. I will be the wind." She drifted away from them, seemingly aimless, but her path took her to a vantage point where she could watch the prisoners be ushered into the dark mouth of the brig. Her eyes lingered on Katara's retreating back. "He thinks he's protecting his leverage," Azula mused, the plan crystallizing in her mind with cold, brutal clarity. "But he's just showing me which string to pull to make his whole world unravel." As the heavy door clanged shut, sealing Team Avatar in their cold, dark cell, the two master manipulators stood under the gray sky of the mountaintop, each believing the other was their puppet. The fortress was the stage. The prisoners were the bait. And the final act was about to begin. The iron door to the brig sealed with a final, resonant boom, leaving the courtyard in a sudden, tense silence. The soldiers, taking their cue from Commander Rio, quickly found duties to attend to, scattering to the walls and watchtowers, giving the royal siblings a wide and prudent berth. Zuko turned from the door, his golden eyes finding Azula immediately. She hadn't moved, still standing where he had left her, a statue of cool indifference, but her gaze was now fixed on him, sharp and expectant. "The prisoners are secure," Zuko stated, the words hanging in the thin air between them. It was more than a status update, it was an opening move. "Indeed they are," Azula replied, her voice a silken purr. "A fine day's work." The Avatar, captured. His companions, neutralized. "Your strategy, it seems, has borne fruit." She took a slow, deliberate step towards him. "You have given me more than proof of a move, Zuzu. You have delivered the prize itself." He met her halfway, closing the distance until they stood mere feet apart, the air crackling with the unsaid. "I have held up my end of our bargain from the very beginning," he said, his voice low, for her ears only. "I provided the opportunity at the temple. I secured the prisoners. I have navigated every obstacle to place our key to redemption in that cell. Your end of our bargain was contingent on concrete progress. I believe this qualifies." Azula's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. She let her eyes drift pointedly around the courtyard, at the soldiers trying hard not to look at them, at the watchful eyes in the towers. "And you wish to collect your reward? Here? Now? With so many prying eyes? My brother. You're becoming reckless in your victory." She tooted softly, a mockery of concern. What would the men think, to see their revered crown prince, the dragon of Nanhai, so easily distracted by his sister's charms? It might undermine that fearsome new reputation you're so carefully cultivating. Zuko didn't flinch. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper that was both intimate and threatening. "Let them watch. Let them see that their prince takes what is his. That my focus is absolute, and my will is law. My reputation isn't built on their approval, Azula. It's built on my power. And part of that power is the fulfillment of agreements made." "Agreements," she echoed, her own voice a whisper now, a duel of hushed tones in the vast courtyard. "You speak of our deal as if it were a trade treaty. As if my body is just another resource to be managed, like coal for your engines." "Isn't it?" he countered, his gaze unwavering. "You offered it as an incentive. A currency for my cooperation in restoring your status. The currency has been paid in full on my side. It's time for the transaction to be completed." She laughed, a low, throaty sound. So clinical. So cold. She searched for the right word, her gaze piercing. "You may wear the armor of a Fire Nation prince, but you think like a merchant, a strategist from a different world entirely. You believe everything can be quantified, every outcome predicted." "Predict this, then," Zuko said, his hand coming up not to touch her, but to gesture between them, a sharp, controlled motion. "I have the Avatar. With him, I can give you everything you want. But my continued enthusiasm for this partnership requires a sign of good faith. A reminder of why we're in this together." He was boxing her in, using her own ambition and their sordid agreement against her. To refuse him now was to risk him withholding the one thing she needed most, the credit for the Avatar's capture. Azula's eyes narrowed, the calculation clear in their depths. She was not a woman who yielded, but she was a strategist who knew when to advance and when to feign retreat. This was a strategic feint. Let him believe he was winning. Let him believe he was in control. "Very well, Zuko," she conceded, her voice losing its mocking edge and gaining a flat, businesslike tone. "A deal is a deal. My quarters are on the upper level, overlooking the gorge. They are marginally more private than this parade ground." She turned, her movements once again fluid and predatory, and began to walk towards the inner keep, not looking back to see if he followed. It was an assumption of his compliance, a power move of its own. "Let us conclude our business, then," she said over her shoulder, the words hanging in the cold mountain air. "And then, we can focus on the far more interesting business of what to do with our new guests." Zuko watched her go for a moment, a faint, triumphant smirk touching his lips before he schooled his features back into impassivity. He followed, his boots echoing on the stone, the victorious prince on his way to claim his prize, utterly unaware that he was walking directly into the gilded center of her trap. Skip Chapter 87 due to explicit scenes. Chapter 88, the morning after the deal. The cold of the mountain fortress bit deeper than any polar night Katara had known. It was a dry, metallic cold that seeped through the thick stone walls of the brig and settled in the bones. She sat with her back against the rough-hewn rock, Sokka's silent, brooding presence beside her. Aang was still unconscious in the corner, his breathing shallow, the heavy chains a grotesque mockery of his usual grace. The memory of his unleashed power, the raw terror of the Avatar state, was a fresh wound on all their minds. The screech of rusted iron hinges broke the silence. The heavy door to the brig swung inward, and Prince Zuko stood framed in the doorway, backlit by the torches in the corridor beyond. He looked different. The severe lines of his royal armor were perfectly in place, his topknot impeccably neat. But there was a looseness in his posture, a certain satisfied ease that hadn't been there before. The faint scent of smoke and a peculiar, musky incense clung to him, cutting through the cell's stagnant air. To Katara, it smelled like victory, and it made her stomach clench. He dismissed the guards with a curt nod, the door closing behind him and leading the four of them in the dim, confined space. His golden eyes, cold and assessing, swept over them before landing squarely on Katara. "Well," he began, his voice a low, controlled rumble that held no warmth. "I have to admit, I didn't think we'd be seeing each other again this soon." Katara met his gaze, her own blue eyes flashing with a storm of emotions she couldn't begin to name. "What do you want, Zuko?" "A great many things," he said, taking a slow, deliberate step into the cell. His boots echoed on the stone. "But right now, I want an explanation. I offered you a place. A role. A chance to be more than a peasant revolutionary playing at war. I gave you a taste of what real power looks like, what it feels like." He stopped a few feet from her, his presence dominating the small space. "And you threw it all away. You denied my request to stay behind, and then you helped the fucking Avatar escape. After everything I afforded you." The words were a carefully aimed dagger, designed to remind her of the gilded cage, the silken prison, the confusing intimacy and the constant, humiliating threat to her brother. "Afforded me?" Katara's voice trembled, not with fear, but with a rising, righteous fury. "You mean when you paraded me around in Fire Nation silks like your human arm candy? When you used me as a prop to make yourself look powerful in front of your sister and your court?" She stood up, her small form radiating a heat that rivaled any firebender's. "When you threatened to kill Sokka to keep me in line? Was that the place you were offering me? The role of a hostage with pretty clothes?" Sokka shifted, a low growl forming in his throat, but he held his tongue, his eyes darting between his sister and the prince. He knew this was a dance he couldn't interrupt. Zuko didn't flinch. He regarded her with an infuriating, detached calm. It was a position of safety. Of influence. You were under the protection of the Crown Prince. You had comforts, status. More than your little village could ever offer. And in return, all you had to do was be present. He shrugged, a gesture of supreme indifference that was more insulting than any shout. A small price to pay for your brother's life, wouldn't you say? And yet, you chose to spit on that protection. You chose to crawl back to this. He gestured dismissively at the cold, dark cell, at Aang's chained form. Protection? Katara spat the word back at him. You call that protection? The constant fear? The way everyone looked at me, the whispers, the way Azula looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her boot? You used me, Zuko. You used me to hurt Aang, to control me, and to make yourself feel like a man when you forced yourself on me in that palace. This was the heart of it. The unspoken violation that lay beneath the silks and the political maneuvering. Her feelings of abuse were genuine, a raw, bleeding nerve. Zuko's mask of calm fractured for a single, fleeting second, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Was it guilt, or merely annoyance at her emotional display? It was gone as quickly as it came. "Don't be so dramatic," he scoffed, his voice regaining its icy control. "You made a choice. You came to my chambers willingly. You played the part. You even seemed to enjoy parts of it." He let the insinuation hang in the air, a cruel twist of the knife. "Or have you rewritten history in your head to make yourself feel better about your betrayal?" Katara felt the heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of shame and pure, undiluted rage. He was twisting everything, reframing her captivity as a consensual arrangement, her survival as complicity. "I did what I had to do to survive," she hissed, her fists clenched at her sides. "To protect my brother. There's a difference between survival and choice, something a prince like you would never understand. And now you've chosen a path that leads right back to a cell," Zuko countered, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Your survival instincts need work, Katara. You had a chance for something more, and you threw it away for a childish fantasy of freedom." He took a final step, looming over her. "Remember this moment. Remember the cold. Remember the chains. This is the reality you chose over the comfort I offered." He held her gaze for a long, punishing moment, ensuring his words had struck their intended mark. Then, without another word, he turned and strode from the cell. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in the silence he left behind, the heavy bolts sliding home with a thud that felt like a sentence. Katara stood shaking, tears of frustration and anger welling in her eyes. Sokka finally moved, putting a steadying hand on her arm. "Katara," he began, his voice soft. She shook her head, wiping angrily at her eyes. "He's a monster, Sokka. A ruthless, heartless monster." The door to the brig boomed shut, its echo a final, dismissive period to the confrontation within. Prince Zuko did not look back, his shoulders set with the rigid satisfaction of a point made, a lesson delivered. His footsteps faded down the stone corridor, the sound swallowed by the fortress's indifferent bulk. He did not see the pair of sharp, golden eyes watching him from the shadows of a high, recessed archway that overlooked the prison block's entrance. Azula stood perfectly still, a statue woven from darkness and cold fury. She had seen him enter. She had watched, waiting, through the long minutes of his conversation. She didn't need to hear the words to understand the performance. She could read it in his posture, in the way he loomed over the water peasant, in the calculated cruelty he exuded like heat from a forge. He was playing the tyrant, reinforcing his control, all while believing he was the master of this intricate game. A fresh, hot wave of anger washed over her. The memory of the previous night was a brand on her mind, not of passion, but of his presumption. The way he had taken what she offered, the way he had growled mine into her skin, the sheer, unvarnished arrogance of it. He had grown accustomed to her. He saw their arrangement not as a precarious alliance between rivals, but as his royal due. He believed his body and his mind could outmaneuver hers. Her fists clenched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. The urge to descend, to unleash a storm of blue fire into that cell and reduce his precious leverage to ash, was a physical ache. To show him, right now, what happened to those who underestimated her. But then, as quickly as it had come, the fury evaporated. It did not recede, it transformed. The tension drained from her shoulders. The harsh line of her mouth softened, then curved. It was not a smile of amusement or pleasure. It was a wild, dangerous smirk, a predator's silent promise. The cold fire in her eyes didn't die, it focused, sharpening into a blade of absolute, chilling clarity. She watched Zuko's retreating back until he turned a corner and vanished from sight. "It is time," she thought, the words a silent, definitive click in her mind, like a key turning in a long-locked door. "Zuko," she whispered to the empty, shadowed archway, her voice a venomous caress. "You have grown accustomed to my body. You have grown accustomed to thinking you can outsmart me." Her smirk widened, a flash of white in the gloom. It was time to shatter every one of those comforts. It was time to remind him, and the entire world, where the true genius in their bloodline resided. I think it's about time we re-establish our natural order. She turned from the archway, her movements once again fluid and silent, a phantom retreating into the heart of the fortress she would soon turn into his tomb. The plan was set. Every piece was in place. His arrogance was the final component she needed. It is time the world finally found who the prodigy is. Chapter 89, The Avatar State. The cold silence of the brig was shattered by the screech of the door hinges once more. This time, it was not Zuko who entered, but a vision of cold fury draped in royal crimson. Azula stood in the doorway, her posture impossibly straight, her eyes burning with a contempt that seemed to lower the temperature in the cell by 10 degrees. Her gaze swept over the prisoners, dismissing Sokka and the still unconscious Aang with a flick of her eyes, before landing, predatorily, on Katara. Well, Azula's voice was a silken whip, lashing through the damp air. Look what the dragon dragged in. Again. It seems some vermin are simply too stubborn to know when they've been crushed. Katara rose slowly to her feet, her own weariness burned away by a fresh wave of anger. What do you want, Azula? Come to gloat? Gloat? Azula let out a light, mocking laugh that held no humor. Over you? Don't be absurd. I'm merely taking inventory. Assessing the tools my brother seems so inexplicably fond of. She took a step inside, her movements a study in controlled grace. He was just in here, wasn't he? Did he regale you with more tales of the grand future you threw away? Did he try to play the magnanimous prince offering you a path back to his bed? Get out, Katara snarled, her hands curling into fists at her sides. Oh, touchy, Azula purred, her eyes glinting. It must be so confusing for you. One moment, you're his prized ornament, draped in silk and hanging on his arm. The next, you're back in chains. It makes a girl wonder what her true value is. She tilted her head, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Tell me, did you actually believe you were special? That the crown prince of the Fire Nation saw something in a backwater water tribe peasant besides a convenient body and a useful leash on the Avatar? The words were designed to maim. Sokka stood up now, his face dark. You shut your mouth. Azula ignored him completely, her focus solely on Katara. He confided in you, didn't he? In that gilded cage of a palace. Played his little games of trust. And you, like a fool, lapped it up. You actually thought you had a bond. We have nothing, Katara shot back, her voice trembling with rage. He's a monster, just like you. Are we? Azula's smile widened, becoming a razor's edge. Or am I just more honest about it? He wears a mask of strategy, but I see the indulgence. The way he kept you close. The way he looks at you. It's pathetic, really. My brilliant brother, brought low by sentiment for a water tribe whore. The slur hung in the air, vile and absolute. Katara didn't scream. She didn't cry. A profound, chilling calm settled over her. She looked Azula dead in the eye, and with a force of pure, unadulterated contempt, she spat. The spittle landed on the pristine, armored toe of Azula's boot. A deadly silence filled the cell. Azula looked down at her boot, then slowly back up at Katara. All pretense of amusement vanished, replaced by an icy, homicidal rage. The air in the cell began to crackle, the tiny hairs on Sokka's arms standing on end. You filthy animal, Azula whispered, her voice deathly quiet. Aang stirred in the corner, his eyelids fluttering open, groggy and disoriented. Katara. Azula paid him no mind. Her body became a study in lethal geometry. She took a deep, centering breath, her stance widening. Her left hand extended, fingers splayed, drawing an arc of unseen energy from the air. Her right hand, held close to her body, gathered the power, two fingers pointed skyward. The air itself seemed to tear, a blinding, white-hot energy coalescing between her fingertips with a terrifying crackle hiss. Jagged arcs of blue-white lightning snapped around her hand, illuminating the cell in a stark, horrifying light. It was the same perfect, devastating form she had used in Ba Sing Se. "No!" Sokka screamed, lurching forward. Aang's eyes flew wide open, the last vestiges of unconsciousness ripped away by the palpable, killing intent. "Azula, don't!" It was too late. With a final, contemptuous thrust of her two fingers, Azula unleashed the lightning. It wasn't a wild blast, it was a precise, focused spear of pure destruction, aimed directly at Katara's heart. Time seemed to slow. Sokka, with a desperate, guttural cry, threw himself in front of his sister. At the same moment, Aang, chains groaning in protest, summoned a burst of airbending to propel himself forward. The world dissolved into searing white light and a deafening crack boom. The concussion threw Aang back against the wall. When the blinding light faded, a scene of devastation greeted him. Sokka lay sprawled on the floor, his body smoking, the front of his tunic blackened and torn. He was motionless. Behind him, Katara was thrown against the back wall, stunned but alive. Her brother had taken the brunt of the blast. A choked, gurgling sound came from Sokka. He twitched, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "Sokka!" Katara shrieked, scrambling towards him, her hands already glowing with healing water, her face a mask of utter horror. Aang did not speak. He did not cry out. He simply rose from where he had been thrown. His head fell forward, then slowly lifted. His eyes were no longer gray, but blazing white, his arrows igniting with an incandescent, cosmic light. The air in the cell began to whip into a frenzy, the very stones of the fortress groaning in protest. The Avatar had not just woken up. He had arrived. And he was furious. The groan of the fortress was not a sound of stone and mortar, but the voice of the world itself, crying out in tandem with the Avatar's rage. The air in the cell, once still and cold, became a screaming vortex. Loose stones tore free from the walls, hovering in the maelstrom. The heavy iron chains binding Aang's ankles did not break, they vaporized, the metal turning to incandescent dust in the face of the raw, elemental power radiating from him. He did not look at Azula. His blazing white eyes were fixed on Sokka's smoking, twitching form and Katara's tear-streaked face as she desperately tried to channel healing water into her brother's chest, the water sizzling and steaming against the catastrophic lightning burn. A low, guttural roar built in Aang's throat, a sound that was not his own, but the collective fury of 1,000 lifetimes. It was the sound of the world's balance, shattered. Azula took a single, instinctive step back, her smirk finally wiped away, replaced by a flicker of primal fear. This was not part of her calculation. This was not a controlled explosion she could manipulate. This was an extinction-level event wearing the face of a child. "Avatar, control yourself," she shouted, her voice barely a whisper against the roaring wind. Aang's head turned towards her. The movement was slow, inexorable. He raised a hand. The wall behind Azula did not crumble. It ceased to exist. A massive section of the fortress's outer shell, stone, iron reinforcement, and all, was simply unmade, torn away into the howling mountain winds as if by the hand of a giant. The sudden exposure to the open sky was a shock, the blizzard outside now invading the brig. Through the gaping hole, the distant, jagged peaks of the mountain range were visible under a bruised, twilight sky. Aang took a step forward. With each step, the floor cracked and buckled, not from impact, but from the sheer pressure of his spirit. He wasn't bending the elements, he was commanding reality. Azula, her heart hammering against her ribs, reacted with the only thing she knew, overwhelming force. She unleashed a sustained, concussive stream of blue fire, a technique that could vaporize steel. It never reached him. The fire met an invisible wall an inch from his skin, flaring and dissipating into harmless motes of light, absorbed by the aura of pure cosmic energy that encased him. His white eyes narrowed. He flicked his wrist. A whip of condensed wind, so sharp it hummed with the frequency of a blade, snapped out. It wasn't aimed at her body, but at the space around her. The stone floor at her feet erupted upwards, not in chunks, but in a fine, cutting dust. It shredded the hem of her robes and scored deep grooves into her armored greaves, forcing a cry of pain and surprise from her lips as she was thrown backwards, her perfect form broken. This was not a fight. It was an annihilation. Aang's gaze returned to Katara and Sokka. A tremor of profound sorrow passed over his illuminated features. He raised both hands now, palms facing the ceiling. The fortress of Firebase Kaze, a bastion of Fire Nation might, began to die. Deep, tectonic shudders ran through its foundations. The ceiling of the brig cracked open like an eggshell, revealing the levels above, where soldiers were screaming, their shouts swallowed by the apocalyptic roar. Support beams, thick as ancient trees, splintered and snapped. The air filled with the deafening symphony of destruction, the shriek of tearing metal, the thunder of collapsing stone, the terrified cries of men being buried alive. Aang was the calm, terrible eye of the storm. A pillar of the ceiling, a colossal weight of granite and iron, crashed down directly towards Katara and the fallen Sokka. Without even looking, Aang pointed a single finger. The pillar halted in midair, hovered for a heart-stopping second, and then shot sideways like a child's toy, smashing through another wall and vanishing into the chaos outside. Through the expanding ruin, Azula scrambled to her feet, her hair disheveled, a thin trail of blood leaking from a cut on her cheek. She saw Zuko then, sprinting into the devastation from a connecting corridor, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. He skidded to a halt, his eyes taking in the scene, the Avatar, unleashed and unstoppable, the crumbling fortress, his sister, battered, and Katara, weeping over what looked like a corpse. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, a silent, screaming exchange of "What have you done?" before the world dissolved around them. Aang let out a final, world-ending cry, and the very mountain seemed to answer. A shockwave of pure spiritual energy erupted from him, an expanding sphere of white light. The last thing Azula saw was the wave of light rushing towards her, and the triumphant, absolute fury in the Avatar's eyes. The last thing she heard was the final, catastrophic roar of Firebase Kaze being wiped from the face of the mountain. Then, there was only light, and the deafening silence of pure, devastating power. Chapter 90, The Scorched Earth. Consciousness returned to Zuko as a dull, throbbing ache behind his eyes and a metallic taste of dust and blood in his mouth. He was buried. Not deeply, but enough that the weight on his chest was suffocating. A frantic, gasping lunge freed his arms, and he shoved chunks of scorched rock and splintered wood off his body, sitting up in a cloud of fine, gray ash. The world he saw was unrecognizable. The midday sun, once filtered by the high peaks, now beat down unfiltered onto a landscape of pure desolation. Firebase Kaze was gone. Not ruined. Not collapsed. Erased. Where the formidable stone fortress had stood was a vast, smoldering crater, its edges fused into a glassy, vitrified slag. The surrounding mountainsides were scoured clean of trees, leaving behind skeletal, blackened rock. The air was dead still, heavy with the silence of a tomb and the faint, sickly sweet scent of ozone and cooked stone. He was sitting in a field of debris, the remnants of the inner keep. A few jagged, half-melted stumps of wall were all that remained to suggest there had ever been a structure here. Groans began to punctuate the silence as other survivors stirred, a soldier pulling himself from under a collapsed beam, another coughing up black phlegm. They moved like ghosts, their faces blank with shock, their Fire Nation armor scoured and blackened. Zuko staggered to his feet, his body protesting with a dozen fresh pains. His mind, however, was a vortex of cold, sharp clarity. He ignored the dazed soldiers, his eyes scanning the devastation with a frantic, calculating intensity. The brig. He stumbled towards where he knew it had been, his boots crunching on the glassy ground. There was no door, no cell, no corridor. Just a deeper scar in the earth, littered with the twisted, half-molten remains of the platinum alloy bars that had once been his ultimate security. They were now just grotesque metal worms, coiled and frozen in their death throes. They were gone. The Avatar. Katara. Sokka. All of them. Vanished without a trace, swallowed by the cataclysm and the subsequent escape it must have afforded them. A cold fury, colder than the mountain air, began to burn in his chest. This was not just a failure. This was a systemic annihilation of his plans. His gaze swept the crater again, and a new, chilling realization dawned. The Mechanist. Teo. He scanned the few stunned survivors again, his eyes cataloging them. Soldiers, officers, cooks. No portly inventor in an oil-stained apron. No boy in a clever wheelchair. They too had seized the chaos, melting away into the mountains they knew so well, taking their invaluable knowledge with them. He became aware of a presence nearby. Azula was rising from the rubble a dozen yards away. Her royal armor was scarred and smudged with soot, a long, shallow gash marring her perfect cheek. Her hair had come loose from its topknot, falling in a disheveled cascade around her shoulders. For a single, unguarded moment, she looked not like a princess, but like a cornered animal, her eyes wide with a shock that mirrored the soldiers. Then she saw him looking. Her mask snapped back into place, the shock hardening into a familiar, venomous contempt. She straightened her back, ignoring the pain it must have caused, and strode towards him, her steps crunching loudly in the utter silence. "Look at this," she hissed, her voice raw, gesturing at the apocalyptic vista. "This is what your sentimentality has wrought. Your precious leverage. Your delicate strategy." Zuko didn't answer her. He turned his back on her, his eyes still fixed on the emptiness where the brig had been. He had orchestrated a trap, but the prey had not just escaped, they had obliterated the trap, the trapper, and the entire mountain in the process. He had unleashed the Avatar state, but he had not accounted for its absolute, world-scouring fury. He had been so focused on his own game, he had forgotten the true power of the piece he was moving. And now, he stood in the ashes of his own ambition, the prize gone, his key assets vanished, and his sister's voice a grating reminder of a failure so complete it was almost sublime. The dragon of Nanhai, the master strategist, the crown prince, was left with nothing but the taste of ash and the deafening silence of his own miscalculation. The game had not just been reset. The board had been set on fire. The cold fury in Zuko's chest was not a pretense. It was real, a white-hot core of frustration at the sheer, unpredictable scale of the Avatar's power and the collapse of his intricate plans. But he channeled it, shaped it, and let it erupt in a direction that served his new, desperate strategy. He turned on Azula, the movement sharp and violent. "My sentimentality?" His voice was a low, dangerous growl that cut through the stunned silence, making the few recovering soldiers flinch. He took a step toward her, his golden eyes blazing with a fury that was entirely convincing. "You arrogant, reckless fool! This is your doing. Your petty, childish need to provoke and humiliate. I had him. He was contained. He was broken. All you had to do was follow orders. But you couldn't resist, could you? You had to go the waterbender, you had to flaunt your power, you had to push until you unleashed that." He gestured wildly at the smoldering crater, his voice rising to a roar that echoed off the scorched rock faces. "This wasn't a battle, Azula. This was an extermination. You didn't just let them escape, you handed them a weapon and dared them to use it. You have single-handedly undone months of work and turned the Avatar from a target into a force of nature. My strategy was to control him, not to create a martyr that can level fortresses with a thought." He was screaming in her face now, every word a calculated hammer blow, reinforcing the narrative of her as the unstable, insubordinate liability. He needed the witnesses to see this. He needed to cement this story in the ashes. Before Azula could form a retort, two figures picked their way through the devastation, their faces pale with a mixture of terror and awe. It was Commander Rio, his uniform torn and his face smudged with soot, and Lee, the strategist, who looked as if he had just seen the fundamental laws of the universe rewritten before his eyes. They stopped a respectful distance away, waiting for the royal tempest to subside. Zuko finally turned his searing gaze from a silently fuming Azula to them. "Report," Zuko bit out, the word clipped and harsh. Rio saluted stiffly, his arm trembling slightly. "Your Highness, the base is, total losses are, incalculable. More than half the garrison is dead, the rest wounded or missing. The structural integrity is non-existent. There is nothing left to salvage. Lee, ever the analyst, spoke next, his voice hushed with a kind of terrified reverence. Prince Zuko, the energy signature, the sheer release of power, it defies all known metrics of firebending or earthbending. This was not a simple application of force. This was a fundamental unmaking. He pushed his cracked spectacles up his nose, his hands shaking. The stories of the Avatar state did not do it justice. We are not hunting a boy. We are attempting to cage a natural disaster. Zuko fell silent, turning his back on all of them to stare out over the crater. He let the weight of their words, the sheer scale of the failure, hang in the air. He could feel their eyes on him, Rio's desperate need for direction, Lee's analytical fear, Azula's poisonous glare. He was the center of this ruin, the prince standing in the ashes of his own command. After a long, punishing silence, he spoke, his voice low and drained, the anger replaced by a grim, steely resolve. The Avatar's power is no longer a rumor. It is a confirmed, existential threat to the Fire Nation, he stated, the words flat and final. He is wounded, grieving, and heading north. He will be more dangerous than ever, but he will also be predictable. He finally turned to face them, his expression a mask of cold command. Rio, gather every able-bodied survivor. Triage the wounded. Secure what little supplies remain. We are not staying here to mourn this rock. He then looked at Lee. Lee. You will draft a dispatch to the Fire Lord. Detail the Avatar's capabilities. Omit nothing. State that Princess Azula's unsanctioned interrogation directly triggered the event that led to the destruction of Firebase Kaze and the escape of the prisoners. It was the final, public nail in her coffin, delivered with cold, bureaucratic precision. He looked between them, his gaze sweeping over the devastation one last time. We are done playing small games on mountaintops, Prince Zuko said, his voice cutting through the thin, dead air. The war has just changed. And we will change with it. We pursue. Immediately. Chapter 91, The Prodigy's Last Stand. The silence in the wake of Prince Zuko's orders was heavier than the mountain itself. The few surviving soldiers, their faces pale with shock and soot, stood frozen for a moment, their eyes darting between their enraged crown prince and the seething princess. The command hung in the air, a verdict delivered in the court of utter devastation. Azula's composure, which had been a mask of cracked ice, now shattered completely. Her eyes, wide with a fury so pure it seemed to suck the light from the air, locked onto Zuko. Confined? The word was a venomous whisper, carrying more threat than a scream. You dare. I am not daring anything, Azula. Zuko's voice boomed, cutting her off. He took a menacing step forward, his own rage a palpable heat radiating from him. I am giving an order. The only one left to give after you burned our primary strategy to the ground. Look around you. This is your legacy. Not a victory, but a crater. He gestured wildly at the smoldering, glassy scar that had been Firebase Kaze. You will be confined to whatever quarters we can secure that still have 4 walls and a door. You will be guarded at all times. You will speak to no one without my express permission. Is that clear? The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. This was a level of royal infighting they had only heard whispers of. Zuko turned to the 2 nearest soldiers, who flinched under his gaze. Escort the princess to the remains of the officers' barracks. Find a room that can be secured. Post 2 guards. She is not to leave. The soldiers, galvanized by the direct command, stepped forward hesitantly. Princess, one of them ventured, his voice trembling as he reached a hand out, not to touch her, but to gesture her forward. That was his mistake. Azula's head snapped towards the soldier. It wasn't a look of anger, it was the flat, predatory focus of a hawk that has just spotted a mouse. Her hand moved in a blur too fast to follow. There was no grand sweep of flame, no explosion. Just a sharp, precise flick of her wrist. A coin-sized sphere of blue fire, hotter than any forge, shot from her fingertips. It didn't hit the soldier. It struck the center of his chest plate with a sound like a blacksmith's hammer on anvil. The impact wasn't explosive, it was concentrated. The polished iron didn't melt, it vitrified, turning instantly into a bubbling, molten hole, the edges glowing red-hot. The soldier screamed, not from a burn, but from the sudden, intense heat that seared through his undershirt and blistered his skin beneath. He stumbled back, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with terror and pain. The other soldier froze, his hand falling to the hilt of his Dao sword. Azula's gaze shifted to him. She didn't move. She simply raised one eyebrow, a silent, mocking challenge. The man's hand fell away from his weapon as if it were white-hot. He took a staggering step backward, his will to fight evaporating under the sheer weight of her presence. She had not attacked them to kill. She had attacked them to teach a lesson. To remind them of the food chain. Only then did she turn her head slowly, deliberately, back to Zuko. The air crackled, thick with ozone and hatred. "You see, Zuzu," she purred, her voice deceptively soft. "This is the quality of the men who follow your orders. You need to send more than children to do a man's job." Zuko stood his ground, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. "Stand down, Azula." "No," she said, the words simple, final, and utterly unhinged. "No, I don't think I will. I have had enough. Enough of this charade. Enough of you." Her voice began to rise, losing its polished control, fraying at the edges into something raw and desperate. "You come back from your little exile, thinking you're so clever. Thinking you're so powerful," she spat. "You swagger around the palace, you whisper in Father's ear, you take my victories and you twist them into your own. You took my position. You took my credit. You took my birthright. And you have the gall, the unmitigated gall, to stand there in the ashes of your own failure and give me orders?" She took a step toward him, her fists clenched, blue sparks dancing between her knuckles. "You have grown arrogant, brother. So confident in your new little tricks, your cold calculations. You think you've surpassed me? You think you've won? You are nothing. You are a shadow, a placeholder, a lucky boy who stumbled into a title he can't possibly hold. Everything you have, you took from me. And I am done letting you have it." The speech was a torrent, a geyser of repressed fury and bitter jealousy finally erupting. It was the cry of a prodigy who had defined herself by her superiority, watching it all be systematically dismantled by the one person she was taught to despise. Zuko didn't flinch. He let her words wash over him, and when she finished, he didn't shout. His voice was low, cold, and sharper than a razor. "Is that what this is about, Azula? Jealousy?" He barked a short, humorless laugh. "You look at me, and you don't see the brother you could push around anymore. You see a man who is no longer afraid of you. A man who doesn't need your approval, or Father's, to know his own strength. That must just eat you alive, doesn't it?" He took a step forward, closing the distance, their auras of fire and fury now clashing in the space between them. "You call it arrogance. I call it resolve. You call it theft. I call it claiming what is mine. You had your chance. You had every advantage, and you squandered it with your petty cruelty and your fragile mind. You are not being confined because I stole your birthright, Azula. You are being confined because you are a liability. A broken tool. And from this day forward, you will live in my shadow. The shadow of the prince who actually accomplished something." He saw the words land, saw the flicker of insane, wounded rage in her eyes. He was pushing her, deliberately, over the edge she was already teetering on. "You think you're still superior?" Zuko's voice dropped to a deadly whisper, his golden eyes burning into hers. "You think your fire is hotter? Your mind is sharper? That you are still the prodigy and I am still the pathetic boy you left behind in the palace courtyard?" He raised his chin, his scar stark in the gray light. "Then prove it." The two words hung in the air, more powerful than any explosion. No guards. No excuses. No interference from the spirits. Just you and me. He took a final, decisive step back, creating a circle of space in the rubble. He swept his arm out, gesturing to the blasted, open ground. Agni Kai. Right here. Right now. A collective, silent gasp went through the assembled soldiers. Commander Rio looked as if he'd been struck. Lee's analytical mind seemed to short-circuit at the sheer, primal audacity of the challenge. The world narrowed to the two of them, standing in the ruins of a fortress, surrounded by the ashes of their ambitions. The sibling rivalry that had defined their lives had just been distilled into its purest, most violent form. Azula stared at him, her chest heaving. The desperation in her speech was gone, replaced by a terrifying, absolute calm. A slow, wicked smile spread across her face, a smile that didn't reach her dead, cold eyes. Finally, she whispered, the word a promise of pain. A suggestion I can agree with. The air, already thin and sharp with the taste of ozone and ash, seemed to freeze solid. The challenge, Agni Kai, did not echo. It was swallowed by the profound silence of the crater, a silence that now felt like a held breath. Azula's smile was a ghastly, beautiful thing. It was the smile of a predator who had finally been allowed to hunt. She did not assume a formal stance. Instead, she seemed to relax, her body going loose and ready, like a coiled viper. Zuko was the opposite. He settled into a classic firebending stance, feet planted firmly in the rubble, shoulders squared. He was a rock, ready to weather the storm. There was no signal. No bow. Azula moved first. It wasn't a step, it was a disappearance. One moment she was standing 10 feet away, the next she was a crimson and black blur closing the distance with impossible speed. She didn't run, she flowed, her feet barely seeming to touch the scorched earth. As she moved, her right leg snapped upward in a vicious axe kick, a crescent of blue fire roaring from her heel straight down at Zuko's head. Zuko didn't retreat. He pivoted on his back foot, his torso twisting. He brought his left arm up in a hard, blocking motion, a shield of roaring orange flame meeting her blue crescent. The two fires collided with a deafening whoosh, scattering embers and superheated air around them. The force of her kick, even blocked, vibrated up his arm. Before the flames had even dissipated, Azula was already in the air. Using the impact as a springboard, she launched herself into a backward flip, her body a perfect wheel of motion. As she flipped, twin jets of precise blue fire shot from her palms, not at Zuko, but at the ground where he stood, trying to destabilize him. Zuko was already moving. He dropped low, one hand slamming into the ground for balance as the blue fire scorched the earth where his feet had been. With the same motion, he swept his other leg in a wide arc, a wave of red fire rolling out toward her landing spot. Azula landed not on her feet, but on one hand, her body parallel to the ground. She used the handstand to spin, her legs whipping around like a top, effortlessly dispersing his wave of fire with a circular kick. She pushed off with her hand, flipping upright and immediately lunging again. This time, she came in low, a series of rapid, knife-handed strikes aimed at his knees and torso, each strike accompanied by a sharp, concussive blast of blue flame. Pop, 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 pop. It was like being attacked by a dozen firecrackers at once. Zuko gave ground, his arms a blur of motion, deflecting and parrying. He couldn't match her speed, but his blocks were solid, economical. Where she was a scalpel, he was a hammer. A blast got through, searing past his shoulder, and he grunted in pain, the smell of burnt cloth and skin filling his nostrils. Seeing his momentary flinch, Azula pressed her advantage. She cartwheeled to his left, then immediately into a second, then a third, a whirling dervish of blue flame in motion, creating a circle of fire around him. With a final, powerful thrust of her palms, she sent the entire ring of fire collapsing inward, a vortex meant to consume him. Zuko roared. He stomped one foot down, hard, and then the other, a double impact that sent two concentric shockwaves of fire erupting outwards from his body. The two vortexes of fire, one collapsing, one expanding, met in a cataclysmic explosion that threw chunks of blackened rock into the air and forced the watching soldiers to shield their faces. Through the smoke and debris, Azula emerged. She ran straight up a tilted, half-melted beam that was all that remained of a wall, using the incline to gain height. At the top, she leaped, spinning horizontally in the air like a thrown saw blade, a continuous ring of blue fire radiating from her spinning form. Zuko looked up, tracking her. He planted his feet, bent his knees, and thrust both fists upward. A massive pillar of concentrated red and gold fire, thick as an ancient tree, erupted from his position to meet her descending, spinning wheel of blue. The collision was not an explosion this time, but a sustained, grinding shriek of conflicting energies. For a long second, they were locked, fire against fire, his raw, powerful column against her spinning, cutting disk. Sparks and tongues of flame rained down, setting small fires in the rubble. With a final, grating shriek, Azula's attack was overpowered. The pillar of fire punched through her spinning wheel, disrupting her form. She was thrown off balance, her acrobatic grace broken. She landed hard, one knee and one hand hitting the ground, her hair falling over her face. She looked up, panting, a wild, unhinged light in her eyes. Zuko stood across from her, his chest heaving, sweat and soot streaking his face. The initial, blistering exchange was over. The ground between them was a patchwork of scorch marks and molten rock. They were both breathing heavily. The speed had been immense, the power terrifying. But they were still standing. The formal Agni Kai was forgotten. This was no longer a duel for honor. It was a fight to the death, and it had only just begun. Chapter 92, The Prince's Show of Force. The momentary pause was deafening, filled only by their ragged breaths and the faint crackle of dying fires in the rubble. The soldiers watching from a distance were statues, their fear forgotten in the face of the spectacle. Azula rose from her crouch, a slow, deliberate uncoiling. A thin trickle of blood ran from her lip where she had bitten it during the hard landing. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, her eyes never leaving Zuko. The wildness was still there, but it was now cold, focused. She was recalculating. "It seems you've learned a few new tricks, Zuzu," she hissed, her voice a low rasp. "But a few parlor tricks won't save you." Zuko stood his ground, his breathing already beginning to steady. The initial, frantic exchange had been a test. He had weathered her storm of speed and precision. Now, it was his turn. "A few tricks?" Zuko's voice was calm, a stark contrast to her venom. It was the calm of a man who knew he held a winning card. "No, Azula. It's not about tricks. It's about foundation. Something you never understood because everything came so easily to you." He took a single step forward, and the air around him began to shimmer with heat. "You see speed. You see power. But you never learned endurance. You never had to." Azula's eyes narrowed. "Spare me your peasant philosophy." "This isn't philosophy," Zuko said, his voice dropping. "It's physics." He didn't lunge. He didn't dart. He began to move toward her with a heavy, deliberate pace, like a landslide gathering momentum. As he walked, he drew a deep, cavernous breath, his chest expanding. The fire around his fists didn't just flicker, it swelled, growing from a glove of flame into a roaring, churning vortex around his entire forearm. He thrust his palm forward. It wasn't the sharp, concussive blast she used. It was a tidal wave of fire. A wide, roaring wall of orange and red, 10 feet high and twice as wide, that rolled across the space between them. It wasn't fast, but it was inescapable, consuming everything in its path, rubble, metal, air. Azula's eyes widened a fraction. She couldn't dodge it, there was no space. She couldn't deflect it, the sheer volume was immense. She was forced to meet it head-on. She planted her feet, crossing her arms in an X before her, and unleashed a focused, piercing beam of blue fire, trying to cut a hole through the center of his wave. It worked, but it was a desperate, costly move. The blue flame tore a narrow tunnel through the rolling inferno, and she dove through it, tumbling onto the ground as the rest of Zuko's fire crashed against the ruins behind her, setting the very stone alight. She was back on her feet in an instant, but a flicker of something new was in her eyes, the first seed of doubt. The strain of countering that single, massive attack was palpable. Zuko didn't give her a moment to recover. He was already drawing in another breath, the energy within him, the vast, untapped reservoir of ki that Victor Crane had brought to this body flowing freely. He swung his arms in a wide, powerful circle, gathering the fire around him like a cocoon. With a grunt of effort, he unleashed it not as a wave, but as a volley. A dozen fireballs, each the size of a man's torso, erupted from him in a fanning pattern, homing in on her position. This was not finesse. This was artillery. Azula became a blur of motion again, but it was no longer the graceful, offensive dance of before. It was a frantic, defensive evasion. She twisted, leaped, and cartwheeled, the massive fireballs exploding against the ground around her, each impact kicking up plumes of shattered rock and forcing her to change direction. One grazed her leg, searing through her trousers and drawing a sharp hiss of pain from her lips. She landed, off balance, her hair streaked with ash and sweat. Her breath was coming in sharp gasps now. She was being worn down. "You see?" Zuko's voice cut through the explosions, calm and relentless. He was still walking toward her, a juggernaut of flame. "Things aren't as simple as they used to be, are they? You can't just be faster. You have to be stronger. You have to last." He stopped, 20 feet from her, and brought his hands together in front of his chest. The fire between his palms compressed, swirling, condensing from a roaring inferno into a sphere of pure, orange, red-hot energy. It wasn't lightning, it was raw, compressed destruction, and it hummed with a power that made the air vibrate. "I have more than you, Azula," he said, his golden eyes locking with hers. "More strength. More will. More fire." He thrust his palms forward, and the sphere shot toward her, not with the speed of lightning, but with the unstoppable force of a comet. This time, Azula didn't try to cut through it or dodge. A look of pure, undiluted fury and desperation crossed her face. She screamed, a raw, primal sound, and met the attack with everything she had left, unleashing a continuous, roaring torrent of blue flame from both hands, a desperate attempt to hold back the tide. The two attacks met in the center of the crater. For a moment, they held, a brilliant, terrible stalemate of blue against a thick red. But Zuko's attack, fed by that deep, seemingly endless well of energy, began to push forward, inch by inexorable inch, driving her own fire back toward her. Zuko stood firm, his feet planted, his body a conduit for overwhelming power. He had the upper hand. He was winning. But he had forgotten one of the oldest lessons of firebending, a lesson his uncle had tried to teach him long ago: a cornered animal is the most dangerous of all. And Azula, pushed to the brink, was not just an animal. She was a prodigy with nothing left to lose. The brilliant, terrible stalemate of blue against white-hot energy stretched for a heartbeat longer, the air screaming with the strain. Zuko's condensed sphere of fire pushed forward, inch by inexorable inch, driving Azula's desperate torrent back toward her. Her boots slid backward in the gravel and ash, her arms trembling with the effort, the muscles in her neck cording tight. The wild light in her eyes was now mixed with something else, the stark realization of raw, numerical inferiority. He simply had more to give. It was in that moment of impending defeat that Commander Rio found his voice. "Prince Zuko! Your Highness, please!" His voice was a ragged shout, cutting through the roar of the clashing fires. He took a few frantic steps forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture, his face a mask of desperate terror. He was not a brave man, but he saw the annihilation of his entire world happening before him. "Stop this! I beg you!" Rio pleaded, his eyes darting between the straining siblings. This solves nothing. We are standing in the ruins of one catastrophe, and you are creating another. The Avatar is getting away. Our mission, the Fire Nation's victory, it's all slipping through our fingers while you fight. Zuko's focus, for a single, critical second, wavered. His eyes flicked from Azula's straining form to the terrified face of his commander. The man was right. This was indulgence. This was the very emotional reaction he had always scorned. He was proving her point, wasting precious energy and time on a personal grudge when the world was at stake. The immense sphere of fire in his hands faltered, its forward momentum stalling. It was the opening Azula needed. But she didn't use it to counterattack Zuko. As the pressure from Zuko's attack lessened, she didn't push back. Instead, with a speed that was nothing short of demonic, she disengaged. Her torrent of blue flame didn't vanish, it was redirected. In a motion so fluid it was barely perceptible, she pivoted on her back foot. Her body turned, her right arm, still channeling a furious stream of blue fire, swept in a flat, horizontal arc. It wasn't aimed at Zuko. It was aimed at Commander Rio. The commander had time for one last, confused thought: why was the princess turning? Before the precise, whip-like strand of cerulean flame sliced through the air. It passed through his neck cleanly, without explosion or fanfare. There was a brief, sizzling sound, like meat dropped on a hot griddle. Rio's pleading expression froze. His head tilted at an unnatural angle, then tumbled from his shoulders, hitting the scorched earth with a dull thud. His body remained standing for a grotesque second before it too crumpled to the ground, a fountain of blood darkening the ashes. A unified, horrified gasp rippled through the soldiers. One of them retched. The silence that followed was more profound and terrible than any noise the fight had produced. Azula stood panting, the fire around her hands dying down to a faint flicker. She looked from the headless corpse to Zuko, a twisted smile of triumph on her face. "No one," she spat, her voice hoarse but dripping with contempt, "interrupts the business of the royal family." Zuko stared, the last of his fire sputtering and dying in his palms. The white-hot sphere was gone, the rage that had fueled it replaced by a cold, bottomless horror. He looked at Rio's body, then at Azula, who looked back at him as if she had just swatted a fly. The fight was over. Not because one had beaten the other, but because something far more important had been irreparably broken. Enough. Zuko's voice was not loud, but it cut through the stunned silence like a knife. It was flat, devoid of all anger, filled only with a final, absolute authority. He wasn't shouting at her anymore. He was pronouncing a verdict. He took a step toward her, his golden eyes hard as gemstones. "This has gone on long enough, Azula. Look at what you've done." He gestured not at the crater, but at the fresh corpse at their feet. "This is not strength. This is madness. And I will not allow this madness to jeopardize our nation any further." He looked past her, to the terrified soldiers. "The Agni Kai is over. By my decree." His gaze returned to her, holding hers with an iron will. "You will stand down. Now." The unspoken words hung in the air, more powerful than any challenge, "or I will put you down, not as my sister, but as a rabid dog threatening the Fire Nation itself." The fight for supremacy was finished. The fight for survival had just begun. Chapter 93, Rin and the Earthbender Girl. The silence in the wake of Commander Rio's execution was thick enough to choke on. The soldiers didn't move, their eyes darting from the headless body to the princess, who stood with a faint, smug smile, to the crown prince, whose face was a mask of cold stone. The air still crackled with the residual heat of their bending and the chilling finality of murder. Zuko did not look at Azula. To acknowledge her now would be to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had gotten to him. Instead, he turned his back on her, a dismissal more powerful than any chain. He scanned the faces of the stunned survivors, his gaze sharp and demanding. "Ensign Lee!" His voice cracked through the silence like a whip. The young strategist, who had been staring at Rio's corpse with a look of academic horror, flinched and snapped to attention. "Why yes, Your Highness. Where is Sergeant Rin?" Zuko's tone was clipped, impatient. He needed competent officers, and the gruff, reliable sergeant was conspicuously absent. "I haven't seen him since before the incident." As if summoned by his name, a clatter of shifting rubble came from the remains of a collapsed storage shed. From behind a shattered support beam, Sergeant Wren emerged, his uniform coated in a fine gray dust, his face smudged and weary. He wasn't alone. A step behind him was a girl, no older than 16. She was slight, with wide, fearful eyes and hair the color of dark ash, tied back in a simple, practical tail. She wore the plain, soot-stained tunic of a camp follower or a junior laundress. Wren's eyes immediately took in the scene, the staring soldiers, the palpable tension, and the body on the ground. His weathered face, usually a stoic mask, tightened. He strode forward, placing himself subtly between the girl and the rest of the assembly. "Your Highness," Wren said, saluting sharply. "My apologies. I was securing the area." Zuko's golden eyes narrowed, flicking from the sergeant's guarded expression to the girl, Mesa, he'd called her, who seemed to be trying to make herself smaller behind him. The pieces clicked into place with sudden, crude clarity. He wasn't securing the area, he'd been digging her out, or hiding with her, prioritizing her safety amidst the chaos. The protective stance, the shared dust, the way her eyes stayed fixed on Wren's back, it was the same unspoken language he'd seen on Kyoshi, the same biological imperative he'd enforced with Lee and Hinero. Meaning Wren was obviously smitten with the girl. A flicker of irritation warred with cold pragmatism. He didn't have time for this. But he also couldn't afford to break the fragile loyalty of one of his few remaining capable men. "Busy," Zuko repeated, his voice flat, letting the unspoken accusation hang in the air for a moment before letting it go. He filed it away at the back of his mind, a piece to be used later if needed. "Get your act together, Sergeant. We don't have the luxury of distractions." He turned his attention back to the whole group, his voice rising, cutting through the shock and reclaiming his authority. "Listen to me. The Avatar's display of power changes nothing about our objective. It only clarifies it. He is wounded. He is grieving. And he is heading north, to the only place left that can offer him sanctuary and training. The Northern Water Tribe." He began to pace in front of them, his boots crunching on the glassy ground, a general addressing his shattered troops. "Here is what we will do. We will gather every able-bodied man. Every weapon, every scrap of food, every waterskin that survived. We will triage the wounded. A quarter of our force will stay here, under the command of the senior medic. Their duty is to stabilize the injured and then begin a slow, safe march to the nearest outpost, Fortress Sung." He stopped and pointed a commanding finger north, towards the distant, snow-capped peaks that seemed to scratch the belly of the sky. "The rest of you, the strong, the willing, the loyal will follow me. We are not chasing a ghost. We are marching to a battlefield. We will push north, to the next Fire Nation stronghold along the coast. There, we will regroup, resupply, and merge our strength with the garrisons. We will build an armada. We will gather an army." His eyes burned with a new, terrifying intensity. The fight with Azula was forgotten, a petty squabble. The true enemy, the true goal, was now in focus. "The final confrontation will not be in some forgotten temple or on a barren mountainside," Prince Zuko declared, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "It will be at the walls of the Northern Water Tribe itself. That is where the Avatar is heading. And that is where we will be meeting him." The orders were given. The grim work of sorting the living from the dying, the useful from the lost, began under the stoic direction of Sergeant Wren and the analytical eye of Ensign Lee. The soldiers moved with a new, grim purpose, the horror of Rio's death and the scale of the task ahead forging them into a harder, more focused unit. Zuko watched for a moment, ensuring the momentum of his command had taken hold. Then, his gaze, cold and deliberate, found Azula. She stood apart from everyone, near the jagged remains of a wall, examining her nails as if the world around her was a tedious dream. He strode toward her, his steps silent on the ashen ground. He stopped a few feet from her, his voice low, a blade meant for her ears only. "A word." She didn't look up. "Come to deliver another thrilling monologue, Zuzu?" Perhaps about teamwork and perseverance? Look at me, he commanded, the tone leaving no room for refusal. Slowly, her head lifted. The smug amusement was still plastered on her face, but her eyes were twin pools of simmering, homicidal resentment. What you saw here today, Zuko began, his voice dangerously quiet, was a fraction. A heated skirmish. A family dispute. It was nothing. He took a half-step closer, invading her space. The Siege of the North, that will be my masterpiece. It will be the battle they write songs about for 1,000 years. It will be the victory that cements the Fire Nation's destiny and my name in history, right beside Fire Lord Sozin's. He leaned in, his golden eyes boring into hers. And I am not going to let your petulant jealousy and staggering arrogance waste it. Do you understand me? Your little tantrum here is over. It ends now. Azula's smirk finally cracked, her lips pressing into a thin, white line. You think you can? I don't think. I know, he interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more threatening than any shout. I am calling on you now, Azula. Not the screaming, impatient little girl who just murdered a loyal officer for interrupting her. I am calling on the Azula I admired. The prodigy. The one who was always 5 steps ahead. The one whose mind was a sharper weapon than any fire she could bend. The calm, calculating genius who could orchestrate the fall of Ba Sing Se without a hair out of place. He held her gaze, challenging the very core of her fractured identity. That is the weapon I need. That is the sister I will take to the north. Not this spoiled child throwing a fit because she's no longer father's only favorite. He paused, letting the words, both insult and plea, hang between them. The game has changed. The stakes are higher than our pride. So, make a choice. Are you the master strategist? Or are you just the broken princess who burns everything she touches when she doesn't get her way? He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the ruins, his final question echoing in the silence he left behind, a challenge she could neither ignore nor easily answer. The grim logistics of survival took over. The wounded were gathered in a makeshift infirmary in the lee of a half-standing wall, their moans a soft counterpoint to the clatter of gathered supplies. The dead, including Commander Rio, were laid in a row, covered with whatever cloaks or canvas could be spared. The sun dipped lower, casting long, skeletal shadows from the ruins. In the midst of this organized despair, Zuko found a moment of relative quiet near the crater's edge. He saw Sergeant Rin directing 2 younger soldiers and sorting a pile of salvaged weaponry. The young woman, Mesa, was never far, quietly helping by gathering scattered crossbow bolts into a quiver, her movements efficient but her eyes constantly, subtly, checking on Rin's position. Zuko walked over, his approach silent on the ash. Sergeant. A word. Rin turned, his face immediately tightening into a mask of professional neutrality, but Zuko didn't miss the flicker of apprehension in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had seen the prince's cold fury and his terrifying power, and now understood the absolute weight of his command. The trust built over months was now coupled with a primal fear. Your Highness, Rin said, his voice even. Zuko didn't bother with preamble. He gestured with his chin towards Mesa, who had frozen, a bolt clutched tightly in her hand. Her. What's the situation? Rin didn't lie. The fear of Zuko demanded honesty, but the trust they built allowed for it. Her name is Mesa, sir. An orphan from a Earth Kingdom village near the coast. She was assigned to laundry and kitchen duties when we arrived at the base yesterday. He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man crossing a frozen river. We connected. I was ensuring her safety during the attack. Zuko's gaze was impenetrable. He glanced back and forth between the hardened sergeant in his 30s and the young, wide-eyed girl. The protective stance, the shared, unspoken language, the same biological imperative he had explicitly encouraged on the ship. He recalled their conversation in the officers' mess with perfect clarity, the laughter about Lee's disastrous proposal, which had then turned serious. I figured I'd have kids by now. Wife. Maybe a second. Definitely a first. I'm in my 30s. I should have left something behind already. You don't have any kids? Zuko had asked. Rin had shaken his head. Not one. Zuko's tone had changed. Low. Commanding. Not cold, but heavy. That's not acceptable. Who did you have in mind? Zuko had asked. Now, standing in the ashes, Zuko repeated that question, not with curiosity, but with the tone of a commander evaluating a strategic asset. I asked you once who you had in mind. Is she the one? Rin stood straighter, meeting his prince's gaze. She could be, Your Highness. Zuko held his stare for a long moment, the memory of his own policy that's not acceptable hanging between them. He had demanded his men build legacies, create something lasting beyond the war. He had orchestrated the marriages on Kyoshi for this very purpose. Remember our talk on the ship, Sergeant, Zuko said, his voice low and deliberate. I told you it was unacceptable for a man of your caliber to have no one to fight for, no one to leave his name to. I meant it. His eyes flicked to Mesa once more, a quick, assessing glance. If she is strong enough, if she is loyal enough, then she is acceptable. But understand this, his voice hardened, your duty is to the Fire Nation first. To me first. Your personal life cannot become a distraction that costs us this war. Get your head clear. I need the focused sergeant I rely on, not a lovesick recruit. It was both a blessing and a warning. He was giving his tacit approval, rooted in his cold, pragmatic philosophy of legacy, while simultaneously drawing a line in the ash. Rin saluted sharply, the relief and tension warring on his face. Understood, Your Highness. It won't happen again. You have my focus. Good, Zuko said, his gaze sweeping over the preparing camp. Now, let's finish this. We march at first light. The north awaits. He turned, his mind already moving to maps and tides, leaving Rin with the profound and terrifying realization that his prince had just peered into his soul, judged his heart, and found it strategically useful. Chapter 94, The Contingencies in Place. The sun rose the next morning on a line of men moving like ants through a world of gray and white. The ruins of Firebase Kaze were a dark smudge behind them, slowly disappearing into the haze of distance and memory. In front lay a vast, frozen landscape of rolling hills and sharp, rocky passes, all dusted with a thin layer of snow that crunched under their boots. At the center of the column, a large, heavy wagon rolled on creaking wheels. It was pulled by a team of 6 massive ostrich horses, their breath pluming in the cold air. Inside, sitting on a crate and wrapped in a thick cloak, was Prince Zuko. His golden eyes were not on the men marching, nor on the path ahead. They were half closed, as if he was sleeping. But his mind was racing, planning, building a secret future while everyone around him saw only the obvious one. To every soldier in that column, the plan was simple and glorious. They were marching to the northern coastal base, a place called Sharptooth Bay. There, they would join with the garrison. They would gather ships. They would build the largest fleet the Fire Nation had ever sent against the Water Tribe. They would smash through the great walls of the northern city, crush the waterbenders, and claim the pole for the Fire Lord. It was a story of conquest. It was what they had been trained for. Zuko let them believe it. It was the perfect excuse. In reality, he had no interest in conquering the city. The thought of a long, bloody siege was a waste of time and men. His goal was not the city itself, but a single, hidden place within it. He remembered stories, read in old scrolls and seen in flashes of memories from his old world. At the very heart of the Northern Water Tribe, behind the great walls and the bustling city, was a secret oasis. It was a spiritual place, a garden of eternal spring hidden in the middle of the frozen wasteland. It was where the Water Tribe kept its most sacred spirits, Tue and La, the moon and ocean. And it was where they kept a small, precious pool of water, blessed by their spirits. Water that had incredible healing powers. He knew this water had once brought the Avatar back to life after he was killed. That was the power he was after. But the water was not his only target. His thoughts then turned to a person. A girl. Princess Yu of the Northern Water Tribe. She had hair as white as snow, a rare and mysterious trait. She was touched by the moon spirit itself. She had powers no one fully understood. She was fragile, kind, and deeply connected to the spiritual world. To Zuko, she was not a princess. She was a tool. A key. Her connection to the spirits and her unique nature could be incredibly useful for the plans he was forming, plans that went far beyond this war. He needed to find her, to secure her, just as he was securing the healing water. Once he had them, well, things would be rather straightforward. As the wagon bumped along, he looked at the marching men. They saw a prince leading them to a great battle. They had no idea he was using their loyalty and their lives as a cover for his own personal mission. They were the noise that would distract the entire water tribe while he slipped in through the back door to steal their greatest treasures. One of the soldiers, a young man with a hopeful look, glanced back at the prince, his face full of admiration for the great leader who would lead them to victory. Zuko met his gaze for a second, then looked away, out at the frozen horizon. He felt no guilt. In his mind, this was not betrayal. This was strategy. The conquest of the North was a side mission. His real war was much, much bigger, and for that, he needed the water that could cheat death, and the princess who could talk to the moon. Hours continued to pass as the sun started its ascension and midday was approaching. Zuko, lost in his plans, decided it was time for an update. He needed the sharp, if irritatingly precise, mind of his strategist. Ensign Lee, Zuko called out, his voice cutting through the march's monotony. Walk with me. From his position further down the column, Lee immediately broke formation. He adjusted his spectacles, which had fogged slightly in the cold, and hurried to fall in step beside the slowly rolling wagon. He moved with a brisk, efficient gait, a walking scroll amidst the weary soldiers. Your Highness, Lee said, giving a short, precise bow of his head without breaking stride. Report, Zuko commanded, his gaze still fixed ahead on the winding path through the frozen hills. First, the princess. How did she behave overnight? Lee cleared his throat, launching into his report with academic clarity. Regarding Princess Azula's nocturnal activities and general comportment, surveillance indicates a state of quiescent but palpable hostility. She acquiesced to the confines of her assigned quarters, a structurally compromised but securable chamber in the former officer's barracks. She offered no physical resistance to the guards posted outside her door. However, her demeanor could be most accurately classified as glacially contemptuous. She has not initiated communication with any personnel, and her sustenance, which was delivered, was consumed, though the guards reported the distinct auditory phenomenon of the utensils being employed with what they described as unnecessary vehemence. In summation, she is contained but volatile, a state of being we should anticipate persisting for the immediate future. Zuko almost smiled. Only Lee could make she ate her food angrily sound like a scientific dissertation. So, she's sulking. Good. Let her. He shifted on his crate. What of the communications from Kyoshi? Have our arrangements departed? Affirmative, Your Highness, Lee replied, pulling a small, mental checklist. The dispatch rider from the Southwestern Courier Line confirmed receipt of your sealed orders. The contingent from Kyoshi Island, comprising the individuals you specified, embarked upon the vessel Firehawk 2 days ago. Given standard maritime velocities and accounting for prevailing currents, their estimated time of arrival at the rendezvous coordinates coincides precisely with our own projected schedule. The logistical synchronization appears to be proceeding within acceptable parameters. A small, quiet piece of Zuko's grand plan clicked into place. He gave a curt nod. And Nanhai? Has there been any report from Minero since she returned there? Lee's expression became, if possible, even more focused. A communique arrived via Messenger Hawk just before our departure this morning. The contents, while indicating a successful macrostrategic outcome, contain politically suboptimal data points. Explain, Zuko said, his voice dropping. Admiral Kuvak has, according to Hinero's embedded report, engaged in a concerted campaign of bureaucratic recontextualization. His objective appears to have been the systematic diminution of your personal agency in the victory over General Fong within the official record. He has attributed the success to broader tactical initiatives of the Naval Command and the collective resilience of the Fire Nation forces. Zuko's jaw tightened. He had expected as much. Kuvak was trying to steal his glory and paint him as a lucky figurehead. However, Lee continued, his efforts have, according to my analysis, proven ultimately futile. The narrative of your direct and decisive engagement with General Fong, culminating in his defeat, has propagated too widely amongst the rank and file to be effectively expunged. The rumor network has proven a more efficient vector for information than official dispatches. While the official record may be sanitized, your de facto reputation remains intact. On a more positive note, the subsequent pacification of the remainder of the Nanhai province is complete. The region is now fully and unequivocally under Fire Nation administrative and military control. So, Kuvak could try to hide the truth in scrolls, but he couldn't stop the soldiers from talking. Zuko would take that. The province was his. And the report we sent to the Fire Lord last night? Zuko asked, the most critical question. The one detailing the incident at Firebase Kaze and our new strategic direction? Lee adjusted his spectacles again, a gesture of supreme scholarly satisfaction. A reply was received scarcely an hour ago. The Fire Lord has granted his full and unequivocal authorization for your proposed operation. You are hereby invested with supreme command authority over the 2nd and 5th Naval Divisions, effective immediately upon your arrival at Sharptooth Bay. This constitutes a force projection of approximately 120 vessels and 10,000 personnel. The Fire Lord's communique expressly states that the resources of the Fire Nation are to be directed towards the swift and total capitulation of the Northern Water Tribe, and he anticipates a conclusive demonstration of the Crown Prince's capabilities. It was everything Zuko had asked for. The leash was off. He had his army, his fleet. The stage was set. Lee, however, was not finished. There is one final directive from the Fire Lord, a codicil to the main body of the orders. He paused, as if reading from an invisible scroll. His Majesty has formally requested the immediate repatriation of Princess Azula to the capital. The phrasing indicates he views her continued presence in your theater of operations as superfluous and counterproductive to operational coherence following the events detailed in our report. Zuko didn't even hesitate. No. Lee blinked. Your Highness? The Fire Lord's request is quite explicit. I heard you, Zuko interrupted, his tone final. The answer is no. Send a reply. State that while I appreciate my father's concern, the princess's unique talents will be critical in the upcoming conflict. The subjugation of a spirit-touched fortress requires a multifaceted approach. She will have her role to play. He looked at Lee, his expression making it clear the discussion was over. He was not sending Azula back. She was a weapon, too dangerous to leave lying around, and he intended to aim her himself. Lee, for once, seemed to grasp the unspoken command. He simply nodded. I shall draft the response accordingly, Your Highness. See that you do, Zuko said, turning his gaze back to the northern horizon, where his real war waited. After Ensign Lee had scurried back to his position, his mind already composing the carefully worded refusal to the Fire Lord, Zuko's gaze found his next target. Sergeant Rin. Here. Now. The sergeant broke from his supervisory role, his march to the wagon quicker and heavier than Lee's. The look of casual ease he showed the troops was gone, replaced by a grim focus. He fell into step beside the wagon, his voice a low rumble. Your Highness. Zuko leaned forward, his voice dropping so only Rin could hear, the words swallowed by the crunch of snow and the wagon's groan. The secondary package. Is it prepared for deployment? Rin's eyes darted, ensuring no one was in earshot. It is. The components are secured. The personnel are pre-briefed and await only the final signal. They understand the absolute discretion required. Good, Zuko murmured, his golden eyes scanning the horizon as if he could see the plan unfolding already. This isn't just another tactical move, Sergeant. This is a foundational piece. What we set in motion here will echo far beyond this frozen wasteland. It's about creating an opportunity that has never existed before. Rin was silent for a long moment, the only sound the crunch of his boots. He finally spoke, his voice thick with a concern he rarely showed. The risk, it's exponential, Prince Zuko. If this is exposed, even partially, the reaction won't just be from the Water Tribe. It will come from everywhere. Our own people included. They won't understand. They'll see it as a betrayal of everything we're supposed to be fighting for. He looked squarely at Zuko. Why? Why chart a course through such dangerous waters? You are basically putting everything you have achieved as collateral. Zuko didn't look at him. His profile was like stone against the gray sky. Because the old maps are wrong, Rin. They lead to a future I have no interest in inheriting. This risk is the price for a different outcome. A better one. I need you to trust that I can see a horizon that no one else can. He finally turned his head, meeting Rin's worried gaze. I need you to trust me. The sergeant held his prince's stare for a long, heavy moment. He saw the absolute, unshakable certainty there, a will that had somehow become iron after years of being brittle. He saw the boy he'd been tasked to follow become the man who was now leading him into the unknown. He let out a slow breath, a plume of steam in the cold air. The doubt on his face smoothed into resigned determination. You have it, Rin said, his voice firm and clear. You've had it since Kyoshi. We will begin implementation the moment we make camp at Sharptooth Bay. Within 48 hours, it will be in motion. Zuko gave a single, sharp nod. See to it. He leaned back on his crate, the brief moment of intense connection over. Return to your post. Your Highness, Rin acknowledged. With a final, lingering look that mixed fear and faith, the sergeant turned and marched back toward the column, his mind already shifting from soldier to shadow, preparing to set a secret in motion that only the Crown Prince understood. Chapter 95, The Sharp Tooth. The march ended not with a fanfare, but with a collective, shuddering exhalation. The column of men, hardened by ash and loss, stumbled to a halt as the frozen plains gave way to the jagged, wind-scoured coastline of Sharptooth Bay. Before them lay the Fire Nation stronghold, a brutalist scar of iron and black stone carved into the cliff face. Smoke poured from its foundries, staining the perpetual twilight of the northern sky, and the acrid tang of coal and industry was a welcome replacement for the scent of blood and ozone they had carried from Firebase Kaze. The bay itself was a churning, slate-gray expanse, filled with the dark, angular silhouettes of warships. The promised Armada. The 2nd and 5th Naval Divisions, merging and gathering. To the weary survivors, it looked less like a fleet and more like a city of floating fortresses, their phoenix-prow banners snapping in the bitter wind, a promise of overwhelming force, or a tomb of ice and steel. Prince Zuko was the first to move, stepping down from the heavy wagon without a backward glance. His golden eyes swept over the fortress, the docks, the fleet, cataloging, assessing. The cold pragmatism that had settled over him in the ashes of Kaze had not thawed, it had crystallized. Sergeant Rin. The sergeant was at his side in an instant, his own weariness buried beneath a mask of professional duty. Your Highness. Get the men settled. I want the wounded prioritized and transferred to the infirmary. The able-bodied are to be fed, re-equipped, and assigned to barracks. I will not have an hour wasted. Zuko's voice was low, but it carried the force of a hammer on an anvil. Then, you will report to the command center. We have plans to finalize. Rin saluted sharply. Understood. Zuko's gaze then found Ensign Lee, who was already fussing with a data scroll, his mind doubtless racing through logistics and supply manifests. Lee. With me. I want a full status report from the garrison commander within the hour. And find out which ship they've designated as my flagship. Without waiting for a reply, Zuko began striding toward the fortress gates, his boots crunching on the gravel-strewn path. The soldiers at the gate snapped to attention, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. The rumors had flown ahead of them, carried by messenger hawks and the desperate whispers of men, the prince's terrifying power, the princess's madness, the headless body of Commander Rio. Lee scurried to keep pace, his voice a rapid, analytical stream. Preliminary observation indicates the stronghold is operating at peak wartime capacity, Your Highness. The reinforcement and resupply orders from the Fire Lord appear to have been executed with commendable efficiency. I will, of course, verify them. Just give me the numbers, Lee. Zuko cut him off, not breaking his stride. Ships, troops, artillery, supplies. I need the ledger. As they passed into the shadow of the fortress walls, Zuko allowed himself one last, fleeting look back at the column. He saw Azula, standing apart from the milling soldiers, her posture rigid, her face a perfect mask of contemptuous boredom. But her eyes, sharp as daggers, were fixed on him. He held her gaze for a single, charged second, a silent acknowledgement of the temporary, hateful truce that stretched between them. Then he turned away, disappearing into the dark maw of the fortress. The game was entering its final, most dangerous phase. The board was set. Now, it was time to move the pieces. The interior of Fort Sharptooth was a stark contrast to the frozen wasteland outside. It was a world of roaring forges, the clang of hammers on steel, and the sharp, disciplined shouts of drill instructors. The air was thick with heat and the smell of sweat, oil, and roasting meat. Soldiers and workers moved with a purpose that bordered on frantic, a hive mobilized for war. Zuko ignored it all, his focus a laser. Lee, half jogging to keep up, managed to procure a map of the complex from a startled quartermaster, and within minutes they were striding down a central corridor hewn directly from the black rock, heading towards the heart of the command structure. They arrived at a set of heavy iron doors, flanked by two Imperial firebenders whose armor was pristine, untouched by the journey's grime. They crossed their spears, barring the way. "Halt! State your business," one of them intoned, his voice echoing hollowly within his helmet. Lee stepped forward, adjusting his spectacles. "You are addressing Crown Prince Zuko, Supreme Commander of the Northern Invasion Force. Stand aside." There was a moment of hesitation. These men reported to a different chain of command, one that had just been violently upended. Their eyes, visible through the slits in their masks, flickered from Lee's determined face to Zuko's impassive, scarred one. Zuko didn't speak. He simply looked at the guard who had spoken. His golden eyes were flat, devoid of anger or impatience, but holding a weight of absolute authority that was more terrifying than any shout. It was the look of a man who had recently burned a fortress to the ground and executed his own sister's would-be usurper without a second thought. The guard's resolve crumbled. He snapped his spear back to his side. "My apologies, Your Highness." The other guard followed suit, and the doors were pulled open from within. The command center was a vast, circular chamber dug deep into the cliff. The far wall was a single, massive pane of thick, greenish glass, looking out over the churning bay and the Armada. In the center of the room, a gigantic, three-dimensional map of the Northern Water Tribe and its surrounding seas was laid out on a stone table, glowing with faint, room-like fire. Around it stood a group of officers. The conversation died instantly as Zuko entered. All heads turned. He recognized the types immediately. The grizzled, veteran captains with forearms like knotted wood. The ambitious, younger commanders with sharp eyes and perfect uniforms. And at the head of the table, two men who commanded the room by presence alone. The first was a mountain of a man, his admiral's uniform stretched tight across a broad chest and powerful shoulders. His face was a roadmap of old battles, with a nose that had been broken more than once and a jaw that looked like it could chew iron nails. This was Vice Admiral Takeda, a legend of the Fire Navy, known for his brutal efficiency and his loyalty not to politicians, but to victory. Beside him stood a man who was his physical opposite. Tall, lean, almost gaunt, with a sharp, intelligent face and long, slender fingers that rested on the map table. His uniform was that of a rear admiral, immaculately tailored. His eyes, a pale, calculating amber, took in Zuko with the speed of a predator assessing a new element in its environment. This was Rear Admiral Sho, a master of logistics and siege warfare, the architect of the supply lines that fed the Fire Nation's endless war. For a long moment, the silence held. Protocol demanded they bow first. They did not move. Zuko let the silence stretch, let the weight of his entrance and his title press down on them. He walked forward, his boots silent on the stone floor, not stopping until he was at the opposite end of the map table, directly facing the two admirals. Vice Admiral Takeda, Zuko said, his voice cutting through the quiet. Rear Admiral Sho. The Fire Lord's orders, I trust, have been received? It was a statement, not a question. He was not asking if they were in charge, he was establishing that he was. Vice Admiral Takeda was the first to break. He gave a short, sharp bow from the neck, a gesture of respect to the title, not necessarily the man. Prince Zuko. We were informed of your arrival. We did not expect you so soon, or with so few. His eyes flickered over Zuko's shoulder, as if expecting to see a full honor guard, not just a single, dust-streaked ensign. The Avatar does not concern himself with our expectations, Zuko replied coolly, his hands clasped behind his back. He forced a change in timetable. We adapt. Report. Rear Admiral Sho's lips thinned almost imperceptibly. He gave a more graceful, but equally shallow, bow. Your Highness. The 2nd and 5th Divisions are at 77% combat readiness. 118 warships are seaworthy and armed. 10,412 personnel are fit for duty. Our supply lines are secure, and stockpiles are sufficient for a 60-day engagement. Zuko's eyes didn't leave Sho's. Make it 45. We won't need 60. A ripple of unease went through the other officers. A young, bold captain with a clean-shaven chin and a fiery glint in his eyes spoke up. With all due respect, Your Highness, the Northern Water Tribe's defenses are formidable. Their walls have never been breached. A protracted siege is what they expect, Zuko interrupted, his gaze finally shifting to the captain. I did not come here to lay a protracted siege, Captain. Captain Ryodo, my prince, the man said, stiffening. Captain Ryodo, Zuko repeated, committing the name and face to memory. A firebrand. Useful, if directed. We are not here to lay siege to a city. We are here to break a spirit. And spirits are not broken with patience. They are broken with overwhelming, unexpected force. He turned his attention back to the map, his eyes tracing the massive glacial walls of the northern capital. Their walls are high. Their waterbenders are powerful in their element. Good. Let them feel secure behind their ice. Let them pour all their energy into defending their front door. He looked up, his gaze sweeping across the assembled officers, finally landing on Takeda and Sho. While they are looking at the front door, we will be coming through the back. Vice Admiral Takeda leaned forward, his massive hands gripping the edge of the table. There is no back door, Prince Zuko. The city is built in a caldera. The only entrance is the main channel, which they can seal with ice at a moment's notice. Any landing on the outer walls would be suicide under their bending barrage. There are more ways into a city than through its walls, Admiral, Zuko said, a hint of something dangerous in his tone. You have provided the hammer. He gestured to the fleet in the bay. I will provide the dagger. He began to pace slowly around the table, forcing every officer to turn and follow his movement. Here is what will happen. The fleet will form a blockade. A tight, aggressive one. I want constant, probing attacks on the main channel. Skirmishes. Harassment. Make them believe our entire strategy is a frontal assault. Drain their energy, keep their benders occupied at the wall. He stopped and pointed a finger at Rear Admiral Sho. Sho. You will identify their primary freshwater source, likely subglacial rivers feeding into the city. I want a plan to contaminate or divert it. Not enough to cause a crisis immediately, but enough to sow doubt, to make them thirsty in a week's time. Sho's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of professional admiration mixed with distaste. A ruthless strategy, Your Highness. It can be done. Takeda, Zuko continued, turning to the Vice Admiral. You will select your best Marines. Not the brutes. The smart ones. The ones who can climb, and swim, and move quietly in the cold. I want 500 of them, formed into a new Special Operations Division. They will report directly to my sergeant, Rin. You will provide them with whatever they need. Takeda's brow furrowed. To what end? That, Zuko said, his voice dropping, is my concern. Your concern is following orders. The air in the room grew colder. This was no mere prince coming to claim a title. This was a commander issuing decrees, challenging their expertise, and demanding absolute obedience. It was Captain Ryoto who broke again, his ambition overriding his caution. Your Highness, forgive me, but this is unorthodox. To split our forces, to engage in such shadow games, when we have the power to simply pound their walls to dust over time, it seems a needless risk. Zuko slowly turned to face the young captain. He didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at him, and for the first time, a sliver of the immense, chilling pressure he had unleashed against Azula seeped into the room. Unorthodox? Zuko repeated, the word soft, yet it silenced the faint hum of the war map. Captain Ryoto, you speak of pounding walls. A valid tactic. But it is the tactic of a sledgehammer. It is slow. It is predictable. And it allows a thinking enemy to adapt. He took a single step towards the young officer, his golden eyes pinning him in place. You question my methods because you have not yet seen their result. You have heard rumors of Nanhai. You've heard the soldiers' chants. But you have not seen the fire that forged that legend. Zuko's gaze swept across Takeda and Sho, including them in his address. General Fong was a sledgehammer. He believed in immovable walls and overwhelming force. He believed the Earth Kingdom could not be broken. A cold, sharp smile touched Zuko's lips. He was wrong. He focused back on Ryoto. You want to know how we break the unbreakable? How we shatter a spirit of ice that has endured for a century? I will show you. Not with a protracted siege. Not with a simple naval bombardment. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet deadly, whisper. The first blow against the Northern Water Tribe will not be a volley of fireballs. It will be my blow. The same one that broke the Earth Kingdom's finest general and his entire defensive line in a single, sunrise strike. He saw the recognition dawn in their eyes. The story had spread, amplified by the triumphant chants of the soldiers who had witnessed it. The Crimson Lotus. The miniature sun that had fallen from the sky. While their walls are manned and their benders are watching the sea for our fleet, Zuko continued, his voice rising back to a commanding tone, I will stand before their great gate. And I will give them a sun to remember. I will show them that the fire that consumed General Fong's arrogance can just as easily turn their frozen fortress into a boiling crater. He pointed a finger at the stunned Captain Ryoto. And you, Captain, will have the honor of leading the first conventional assault immediately after. While they are blind, deaf, and reeling from a power they cannot comprehend, you will drive your ship straight into the chaos and secure a beachhead. That is how we use overwhelming force. Not with patience, but with precision. Not by pounding the wall, but by vaporizing its guardians. He let the image hang in the room, the cataclysmic blast, the panic, the swift, brutal follow-up. Is that unorthodox enough for you, Captain? Or does the prospect of walking into a victory I hand you still seem a needless risk? Captain Ryoto's face had transformed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a pale, fervent awe. He looked less like an officer and more like an acolyte who had just been shown a divine vision. He snapped to attention, his back ramrod straight. "No, Your Highness. It is a brilliant strategy. I would be honored to lead the vanguard." Zuko gave a single, curt nod. "Good." His gaze swept the room one final time, challenging any other objections. "The strategy session is over. You have your orders. Vice Admiral Takeda, Rear Admiral Sho, you will have detailed deployment plans sent to my ensign to deliver to me by dawn." Dismissed. For a heartbeat, no one moved. They were admirals and captains, used to debate, to counsel. But Zuko had not debated. He had unveiled a fragment of his power and offered them a place in the legend he was writing. It was a far more compelling argument than any tactical dissertation. Then, Vice Admiral Takeda let out a slow, grumbling breath. He straightened up and gave a full, formal bow. "By your command, Your Highness." It was all the signal the others needed. Bows were made, and the officers filed out of the room, their whispers already beginning the moment they passed through the iron doors. The tone had changed from resistant disbelief to electrified anticipation. Soon, only Zuko and Lee remained in the vast command center, the glowing map between them. The only sound was the distant, muffled industry of the fortress and the ever-present groan of the ice outside. Lee finally dared to speak, his voice hushed. "A masterful manipulation of morale, Your Highness. You transformed a critic into your most zealous subordinate." Zuko didn't answer. He was staring out the massive window, at the armada that was now his to command. He saw the ships, the soldiers, the power. But in his mind's eye, he saw something else entirely, a hidden oasis, a girl with moon-pale hair, and a path leading away from all of this, into a different kind of war altogether. He had taken command. The first move was made. Now, he had to wait for Azula to make hers. Chapter 96, The Frozen Fortress. The wind whipped past Appa's face, not in its usual gentle gusts, but in a continuous, screaming torrent. The air was so cold it felt solid, a wall of ice crystals that stung the eyes and stole the breath. Aang, perched on Appa's head, leaned forward as if his own will could push the great bison to fly faster. His knuckles were white where he gripped the reins, his face a mask of grim determination, the cheerful boy buried under the weight of a world he was failing to protect. Behind him, in the saddle, Katara cradled Sokka's head in her lap. Her brother was swathed in every blanket they possessed, his own parka, and rough, torn strips of cloth from her own water skins, forming bulky bandages over the worst of the lightning burn on his chest. The acrid scent of ozone and charred flesh still clung to him, a horrifying reminder of Azula's precision strike. His skin was clammy and pale, his breathing a shallow, rattling thing that hitched with every jolt of turbulence. A faint, feverish sweat beaded on his forehead, immediately freezing in the polar air. Katara's hands, glowing with a faint, desperate blue light, never left his chest. She channeled every ounce of her healing ability into him, but the damage was profound, a deep, spiritual wound that her skills could only barely soothe. The water sizzled and steamed against the unnatural heat still simmering in the injury. "He's getting colder, Aang." Katara's voice was raw, stripped of hope and filled with a terror that had been building since the fortress fell. I can't get his fever to break. It's like the fire is still inside him." Aang didn't turn. "We're almost there. I can feel it." He wasn't lying. The spiritual energy of the pole was a palpable force, a thrum in the world's pulse that grew stronger with every beat of Appa's weary wings. "Hold on, Sokka," he whispered, a plea to the wind. "Just hold on." Then, through the swirling veils of snow and mist, it appeared. A city of ice. It was not merely built of ice, it was ice, a breathtaking, impossible metropolis that seemed to have been grown from the very glacier it sat upon, not constructed. The entire city, Agna-Kele, was a masterpiece of waterbending architecture, its structures carved from impossibly thick, luminous blue-white ice that glittered in the weak polar light. The city was a labyrinth of canals and waterways, frozen thoroughfares that snaked between towering structures, with small, gondola-like boats trapped in the ice, waiting for a thaw that never came. Dominating the scene was a colossal, curved wall of ice, towering and impossibly thick, that formed a formidable defensive barrier at the mouth of the city, shielding the inner sanctums from the open sea. Beyond the wall, the city rose in a stunning display of artistry and power. The buildings were a fusion of elegant, sweeping curves and sharp, pagoda-like tiers, their designs echoing a style reminiscent of Chinese architecture but rendered in a medium of pure, magical ice. Whale bones, massive and ancient, were integrated into the larger structures as foundational supports, a stark reminder that this civilization drew its strength from both the ice and the sea. At the city's heart, surrounded by lesser spires and domes, stood the Northern Water Tribe Royal Palace, the most magnificent structure of all. It was a complex of interconnected towers and great halls, its central dome dominating the skyline, a testament to the power and lineage of the chief who ruled from within. "It's beautiful," Aang breathed, the words torn from his lips by the wind. "Just get us down," Katara cried, her focus entirely on Sokka's labored breathing. Appa, sensing their destination and driven by the urgency in his friends' voices, let out a deep, groaning bellow. The sound echoed across the silent, frozen capital, a foreign and alarming noise in this place of ordered quiet. He began his descent, angling toward the largest open plaza he could see near the palace, his flight path becoming erratic and frantic. Below, the peaceful rhythm of the city shattered. Northern Water Tribe citizens, bundled in their dark blue and purple parkas, looked up from their daily tasks. Their faces, initially curious, transformed into alarm as the enormous, six-legged shadow fell over them. Warriors training on a nearby platform dropped their stances, reaching for their weapons. The appearance of a flying bison was the stuff of legends here, a creature not seen for a century, and its sudden, desperate arrival signaled an unprecedented event. Appa slammed into the wide, icy plaza with a force that sent cracks skittering across the ground. He skidded several yards, his great weight and momentum making stopping impossible, before coming to a shuddering halt. He lowered again, a tired, pained sound, his flanks heaving. Aang was on his feet in an instant. "We need a healer," he screamed, his voice cracking with panic and exhaustion. He scrambled over the saddle to help Katara. "A master healer. Now! My friend is dying." Katara was already trying to pull Sokka toward the edge, her strength failing her. "Please," she added her voice to his, her eyes scanning the gathering, stunned crowd, looking for anyone in authority, anyone who could help. He was struck by lightning. "Please, help him." The water tribesmen formed a cautious, wide circle around the bizarre sight. They saw a young air nomad, a girl of their own tribe crying over a grievously wounded boy, and a mythical beast on the verge of collapse. It was a scene of pure, undiluted desperation, a splash of violent chaos in their serene, frozen fortress. For a moment, nobody moved, the tradition-bound society frozen in indecision. Then, the crowd parted. A tall, stern-faced man with a topknot and master's beads adorning his parka stepped forward. His eyes, sharp and assessing, took in the scene, the true desperation on Katara's face, the lethal nature of Sokka's wound, the Avatar's clear distress. This was Master Pakku, and his expression, though severe, was not unkind. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd with the authority of decades of command. He pointed to a group of his students. "Fetch a stretcher and the senior healers from the infirmary. Run!" His gaze then fell upon Katara, and for a fleeting second, something unreadable flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at the raw power he could sense radiating from her, even in her distraught state. He gave her a short, sharp nod. "The boy will be seen to," Pakku stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Bring him down." Relief, so potent it felt like a physical blow, washed over Katara. Her knees buckled, and she slumped against Sokka's still form, the first tears of hope mixing with the frozen ones of despair on her cheeks. They had made it. The race was over. But the battle for Sokka's life was only just beginning. Chapter 97, The Heart of the Tribe. The command from Master Paku was like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of immediate action through the frozen crowd. The initial shock of the Sky Bison's arrival was subsumed by a wave of disciplined purpose. Two of Paku's senior students broke from the circle and sprinted across the slick ice of the plaza, their footsteps sure and swift, heading towards a low, domed structure built into the side of the glacial wall. The silence was broken by the frantic, raw sound of Katara's sobs, a mixture of relief and terror. "Did you hear that, Sokka? They're going to help you. You're going to be okay," she whispered, her voice cracking as she brushed a strand of hair from his fevered brow. Her healing water still glowed against his chest, but the light was flickering, her own energy reserves nearly depleted. Aang helped her carefully maneuver Sokka toward the edge of the saddle. Every jostle drew a pained gasp or a weak, delirious murmur from Sokka. He was a dead weight, the vibrant, boomerang-slinging strategist replaced by a shell of a boy clinging to life by the thinnest of threads. Within moments, the students returned, not with a simple stretcher, but with a sled-like pallet made of polished, dark whalebone and supple sealskin, carried by 4 grim-faced men in the deep blue tunics of the tribe's healers. They moved with a quiet, solemn efficiency that spoke of generations of practice. Gently, the lead healer, a woman with lines of experience etched around her eyes and streaks of gray in her black hair, instructed. "Support his head and back. The injury is to the core." With Aang and Katara's help, they transferred Sokka from Appa's saddle onto the pallet. The moment he was settled, the healers lifted him in unison and began a swift, smooth procession away from the plaza. The crowd parted for them, their murmurs now hushed and respectful. "Don't lead him," Aang said to Katara, his own anxiety a tight knot in his stomach. He felt utterly useless, his airbending and nascent avatar state meaningless against the slow creep of death. "I won't," Katara vowed, her gaze locked on her brother's pale face. She stumbled slightly as she walked, her legs numb from the long flight and the emotional torrent. Aang caught her arm, and together, they followed the healers, a small, desperate procession trailing the wounded warrior. They moved from the open expanse of the plaza into a network of narrower, covered pathways carved through the ice. The sounds of the city faded, replaced by the drip of melting ice and the echo of their own footsteps. They entered the domed structure, the entrance flanked by 2 massive, arched whale ribs. Inside, the air was noticeably warmer, heated by low-burning oil lamps that cast a soft, orange glow on walls of smooth, milky ice. The main chamber was a long hall lined with cots, most of them empty. The healers took Sokka to a private alcove at the far end, curtained off by a heavy pelt. Here, the light was brighter, coming from a single, large lamp hanging from the ceiling. The walls were lined with shelves holding clay pots, bundles of dried herbs, and an array of water skins, some ordinary, others seemingly special, made of finer leather and sealed with intricate knots. The lead healer, who introduced herself as Yuna, began her work with a quiet intensity. She cut away the rough, makeshift bandages Katara had applied, her face tightening as the full extent of the lightning burn was revealed. The skin was a horrific mosaic of black, angry red, and waxy white. The shape of the blast radiating out from his sternum. The smell was worse here, in the enclosed space. "Azula's lightning," Aang whispered, his voice thick with guilt. "It was meant for Katara." Yuna nodded, her expression unreadable. "The fire is not just on the skin. It has poisoned his chi, his spirit. Normal healing can only do so much." She turned to one of her assistants. "The blessed water. Quickly." The assistant hurried to a small, locked chest made of dark, lacquered wood. He produced a key from a chain around his neck, unlocked it, and reverently lifted out a small water skin, no larger than a drinking gourd. It was crafted from pure white leather and inlaid with mother-of-pearl that shimmered in the lamplight. Yuna took it with both hands, her demeanor shifting to one of profound reverence. She untied the seal and poured a small amount of the contents into a shallow, stone bowl. The moment it was exposed to the air, the difference was palpable. This was not like Katara's bending water, or the melted ice of the tribe. This water glowed. It was a soft, internal, aquamarine light that pulsed gently, as if it held a tiny, living star within its depths. It seemed thicker, more viscous, and it moved with a life of its own, clinging to the sides of the bowl without spilling. "The spirits provide," Yuna murmured. She dipped her fingertips into the glowing water, and her own hands began to radiate the same ethereal light, far brighter and more intense than Katara's bending had ever been. She began to work, her touch feather-light on Sokka's chest. Where her glowing fingers passed, the angry, blackened flesh seemed to sigh. The inflammation visibly receded, the color shifting from necrotic black to a painful but healthy pink. The water didn't just heal, it seemed to cleanse, drawing out the lingering, malevolent energy of the lightning. A faint, silver steam rose from the wound, carrying with it the scent of ozone, which was swiftly replaced by a clean, alpine fragrance. Katara watched, mesmerized and humbled. This was a level of healing she had never dreamed of. It was spiritual alchemy. She could feel the profound peace and power radiating from the water, a balm to her own frayed spirit. She saw Sokka's breathing deepen, the terrifying rattle in his chest quieting, his body relaxing into a true, restorative sleep for the first time since the attack. For nearly an hour, Yuna and her assistants worked, reapplying the blessed water until the entire wound was stabilized. The raw, open flesh was now closed, covered in a layer of new, pink skin. The battle was not over. Sokka was still dangerously weak, his body exhausted from the trauma, but the tide had turned. He was no longer dying. It was then that the pelt curtain was drawn aside. Master Pakka stood there, his stern gaze taking in the scene. His eyes lingered for a moment on the now sleeping Sokka and the still glowing residue of the blessed water on Yuna's hands. "The Avatar," Pakka said, his voice low but firm. "And his companion. Chief Arnuk has arrived. He wishes to speak with you." Katara didn't even look up. Her hand was clutching Sokka's, her knuckles white. "I can't leave him," she said, her voice a raw whisper. "Not now. I'm not going anywhere." Aang stood protectively beside her. "Where Katara stays, I stay. Sokka is my friend." To everyone's surprise, including Aang's, Katara shook her head. She finally looked up at him, and her eyes were different. The desperate, greeting sister was gone, replaced by someone with a hard, fierce resolve. The sight of that miraculous water, the brush with a power so far beyond her own, had lit a new fire in her. "No, Aang," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You have to go." Aang blinked, confused. "Katara, You are the Avatar," she cut him off, her gaze boring into his. "A healer is with my brother. Your duty isn't in this room. It's out there." She gestured vaguely beyond the walls of the hut. "You stopped a war once. Now you need to prepare for the one that's coming." "I felt it, Aang. On the wind, as we flew. A storm is gathering. You need to be the Avatar right now. For all of us." Her words were like a physical push. She was shutting him out, not out of anger, but out of a desperate, painful need for him to be the hero the world required. She would hold the line here, with her brother. He had to hold the line everywhere else. Stung and deeply confused by her sudden shift, Aang could only nod. He gave Sokka one last, long look, then turned and followed Master Pakku out of the healing hut, leaving Katara alone in the warm, quiet alcove, her hand still tightly holding her brother's. Outside, the polar air was a sharp slap after the hut's warmth. The plaza was now clear of most onlookers, save for a new, solemn group. Standing before a weary, groaning Appa was an older, dignified man with a long gray beard and a tall, wolf-tail headdress adorned with sacred tokens. He wore robes of the finest dark blue fur and leather, and his presence carried the weight of a lifetime of leadership. This was Chief Arnuk. Flanking him were his personal guard, warriors with stern faces and hands resting on the hafts of their spears. Pakka led Aang before them. "Chief Arnuk," Pakka said, with a respectful bow of his head. "This is the boy. The Avatar." Arnuk's wise, weary eyes studied Aang, taking in his shaved head, the arrows, his youthful face etched with exhaustion and worry. He saw not a legendary figure, but a tired child who had just brought a world of trouble to his doorstep. "So," Chief Arnook said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to emanate from the ice itself. "The stories are true. The Avatar has returned. And you arrive not with hope, but with a trail of fire and lightning. Tell me, young Avatar, what storm do you bring to our gates?" Hanging heavily in the air around him, the icy plaza seemed to press in, the grandeur of the glacial city feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. He was the Avatar, a title that now felt less like a calling and more like a curse that drew danger to everyone he loved. Back inside the healing hut, the warm, quiet hum of spiritual energy was broken only by Sokka's steady, sleeping breaths. The frantic terror had passed, leaving behind a hollowed-out exhaustion in its wake. Katara sat on a stool beside the cot, her brother's hand clasped tightly in both of her own. Her thumbs traced absent circles over his knuckles, a desperate, grounding ritual. Yuna and the other healers had given them space, moving to the outer chamber to prepare poultices and speak in hushed tones. In the profound silence of the alcove, with the glowing residue of the blessed water still fading from her vision, the dam finally broke. All the fear, the helplessness, the sheer, unbearable tension of the frantic flight and the sight of her brother's lifeless form, it curdled. It turned inward, seeking a target, a reason for the agony. And it found one. Her head bowed, her shoulders slumped, and the words slipped out in a venomous, shuddering whisper, meant for no one but the spirits and the ice itself. "This is all Aang's fault." The confession hung in the sacred space, a blasphemy against the peace of the healing water. If he had never been found, if he had just stayed lost in that iceberg, her voice was a raw scrape of sound, her grip on Sokka's hand tightening until her own knuckles turned white. We would be home. In the South Pole. Minding our own business. Sokka would be complaining about seal jerky and trying to invent a new way to catch fish. I'd be healing scrapes and listening to grand stories. Tears, hot and angry, finally spilled over, tracing paths through the soot and grime on her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of bitter, furious resentment. There would be no Fire Nation princes. No sieges. No lightning. Her gaze fell upon Sokka's bandaged chest, the memory of Azula's smirk and the searing flash of light burning behind her eyes. Sokka wouldn't be lying here, half dead. None of this would have happened. We were safe. We were ignorant, but we were safe. The thought was a seductive poison, offering a simple, clean narrative where the cause of all their pain was not a war, not a cruel princess, not a chain of impossible choices, but a single, simple variable, the boy she had come to think of as family. But was it true? The moment the question formed in her mind, the foundation of her anger trembled. She remembered the Fire Nation raid on her village, long before they ever found Aang. She remembered the empty space where the men should have been. The war had already taken everything from her. Aang hadn't started the war, he was the only conceivable way to end it. Yet, the feeling remained, ugly and undeniable. His arrival had been the catalyst that ripped them from their simple, struggling existence and hurled them into the heart of a global cataclysm. His destiny had become their shackles. Her love for him, genuine and fierce, was now tangled with a thick, thorny vine of blame. She had urged him to go, to be the Avatar, to face the gathering storm. But as the pelt curtain fell back into place, separating her from him, a chilling realization settled in her heart. Had she sent him away to fulfill his destiny? Or had she sent away the living reminder of everything that had gone wrong? With a question that quailed deep within Katara's soul, as cold and sharp as the ice of the North Pole. What did this bitter seed of resentment mean for her? For her friendship with Aang? And for the fragile, fractured hope of a world depending on them to stand together? Chapter 98, The Gathering Storm. The air in the chief's ceremonial igloo was thick with the scent of burning whale oil and a tension so palpable it felt like the walls of ice themselves were holding their breath. Aang stood on a woven mat in the center of the spacious chamber, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. Before him, seated on a raised dais of carved whalebone and glacial ice, was Chief Arnuk, his posture one of ingrained authority. To his right stood Master Paku, his arms crossed, his expression an unreadable mask of stern appraisal. Flanking them were other high-ranking tribesmen, seasoned warriors with faces weathered by wind and war, and wise women whose eyes held the deep, knowing silence of the ocean. Appa's frantic arrival had been an earthquake. This was the aftershock, a formal inquisition to measure the scale of the coming cataclysm. "You have brought a wounded warrior to our gates, Avatar," Chief Arnuk began, his voice a low rumble that filled the chamber without needing to rise in volume. "And you have spoken of lightning. Such power is rare, even among the Fire Nation's elite. Tell us of your enemy." Aang took a shaky breath, his hands clenched at his sides. He was a child reporting to elders, a novice standing before masters. "Her name is Azula," he said, the name itself tasting like ash. "She's a princess of the Fire Nation. And she's perfect. Her fire is blue, hotter than anything I've ever seen. She doesn't just bend lightning, she commands it. She's a prodigy." He swallowed, the memory of her cold, triumphant smile as she unleashed the bolt flashing in his mind. "And she's completely ruthless." A murmur went through the assembled tribesmen. Blue fire. Lightning generation. These were not the traits of a common soldier, they were the hallmarks of a weapon of mass destruction. "And this Azula," Paku interjected, his sharp voice cutting through the murmur. "She acts alone? A single princess, however gifted, does not constitute the storm our chief mentioned." This was the heart of it. The question Aang had been dreading. He looked from Paku's discerning gaze to Arnuk's heavy, waiting one. "No," Aang said, his voice firming with conviction. "She doesn't act alone. She's with him. The one who's really coming." He paused, letting the significance hang in the air. "Prince Zuko." The name landed in the chamber with the weight of a tombstone. Many of the warriors shifted, their hands instinctively tightening on their weapons. Zuko's name, unlike Azula's, was known here. It was the name of the prince who had returned from exile with the Avatar in chains, the name that had been whispered in dispatches from the Earth Kingdom, often accompanied by words like relentless, determined, and victorious. "The Crown Prince," Arnuk stated, his eyes narrowing. "The Fire Lord's heir." "You are certain?" "I'm certain," Aang affirmed, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He was there, at the mountain fortress, just before it was destroyed. He commands her, or at least, he tries to. Their alliance is complicated. But when he gives an order, the Fire Nation moves. He thought of the sheer, unyielding will in Zuko's golden eyes, a force of nature far more terrifying than Azula's manic precision. Azula is the weapon, but Zuko is the general. He's the mind. And he's coming here. To what end? Paku demanded. For a personal grudge? To recapture you? I don't think so, Aang said, his mind racing, piecing together the fragments of his encounters with the prince. Not just for me. It's bigger than that. He has an interest in spiritual things. But the main reason is the war. He knows I'm wounded, that I need a teacher. He knows this is the last great center of waterbending in the world. He's not just chasing me anymore. He's coming to extinguish the last source of water. To break one of the final 3 strongholds that stands against the Fire Nation's total victory. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the warriors, trying to make them see what he saw. And he won't come with just one ship. Not this time. He's coming with a fleet. A big one. I don't know when. I don't know how many ships. But I know, with absolute certainty, that he is coming. And he will bring fire and iron to your ice and water. The silence that followed was heavier than any he had experienced. It was the silence of a people who had believed themselves untouchable, confronted with the undeniable truth of their own vulnerability. You speak with conviction, boy, one of the older warriors grumbled, his beard white with age. But we have heard such prophecies of doom before. Our walls have stood for 100 years. No Fire Nation ship has ever breached our defenses. Prince Zuko isn't like the other generals. Aang insisted, a flash of frustration breaking through his fear. He doesn't fight like them. He doesn't think like them. I know you heard what he did again, General Fong and his men. At the Battle of Nanhai, he didn't just attack the army, he created a miniature sun and dropped it on them. He broke General Fong, one of the Earth Kingdom's best, in a single morning. He's not just a prince, he's a force of nature. He will find a way. He always finds a way. He was pleading with them now, his voice echoing in the quiet chamber. We have to be ready. We have to prepare for an invasion the likes of which you've never seen. He won't just sail up to the front gate and knock. He'll have a plan. A terrible, brilliant plan. Chief Arnook leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his intertwined fingers pressed to his lips. He studied Aang for a long, long time, his wise eyes seeing past the boy's fear to the hard-won truth beneath it. Your words carry the weight of experience, Avatar Aang, the chief said finally, his voice grave. And we would be fools to ignore the warning brought on the wind by the last Airbender and his sky bison. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping across his council. The time for peace is over. The time for vigilance is now. He looked at Pakku. Master Pakku, double the watch on the outer wall. Have the scouts range further south. I want daily reports on any ship, any smoke, any sign of movement in our waters. Pakku gave a sharp, acknowledging nod. It will be done. Arnook's gaze then returned to Aang, and in it, Aang saw a terrible resolve, and a flicker of something else, pity. You have brought us a warning, and for that, the Northern Water Tribe thanks you, Arnook said. But you have also brought the storm with you. From this moment forward, your destiny and the destiny of our city are one. Prepare yourself, Avatar. The battle for the soul of the water is coming. And it will be fought here, on our ice, at our gates. The council was dismissed. The tribesmen filed out, their faces set in new lines of grim determination. Aang was left standing alone in the vast chamber, the chief's final words echoing around him. He had delivered his warning. He had been believed. But as he looked out through the arched entrance at the serene, glistening city, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic air. He had not just predicted a battle. He had, in some way, declared it. And he was now at its very center. Chapter 99, The Weight of Water and Legacy. The heavy pelt flap of the ceremonial igloo fell shut behind the last of the departing warriors, leaving Aang alone in the vast, echoing space with the ghost of Chief Arnook's final pronouncement. The weight of the city, the tribe, the entire war, seemed to settle squarely on his small shoulders. He felt the profound isolation of his title more acutely than ever. Katara, his rock, had pushed him away. Sokka, his strategist, was fighting for his life. He was alone. But despair was a luxury he could not afford. He saw Master Pakku about to exit through a different archway, his form a silhouette of disciplined grace against the bright ice beyond. Aang's feet moved before his mind could second-guess the impulse. Master Pakku. The waterbending master paused and turned, his expression as inscrutable as ever, but he did not speak, merely raising a single, expectant eyebrow. Aang stopped before him, bowing deeply from the waist, a sign of utmost respect. Master Pakku, he began, his voice firm despite the tremor in his heart. I need your help. I need to train. I have to get as strong as I possibly can, as fast as I can, before the attack comes. I can't just wait for it. Please. Will you teach me? Pakku studied the young Avatar. He saw the fear, yes, but beneath it, he saw a core of steel that had been forged in fire and lightning. He saw the determination that had driven this boy to cross an ocean with a dying friend. The Avatar asking for training is not a request, it is a necessity, Pakku replied, his voice crisp and clear. But do not mistake this for a simple lesson. The power of water is not merely gusts of wind given form. It is fluid, it is relentless, it is both life-giving and unforgiving. It will not bend to a frantic will. It requires precision, control, discipline. Aang met his gaze, his own gray eyes blazing with white-hot resolve. I understand. I will learn. I have to. Good, Pakka said with a curt nod. Then your training begins at first light. Do not be late. If we have any chance of surviving what is coming, the Avatar will need to be more than a boy who pushes air. He must become the ocean itself. With that final, daunting command, Master Pakka turned and strode away, his footsteps silent on the ice, leaving Aang standing alone once more. The weird, cold way Katara had treated him echoed in his mind. You need to be the Avatar right now. Her words had felt like a rejection then, a door slammed in his face. But now, in the stark silence of his solitude, he found a grim truth in them. She was right. His feelings, his confusion, his hurt, they were distractions he could no longer afford. According to the plan laid out in the spirit world, he had 2 weeks. Victor Crane, the name was strange on his tongue, a fusion of 2 identities that Aang's mind couldn't separate, had been explicit. I will give you 2 weeks after you arrive at the Northern Water Tribe to learn what you can. That is as much as I can delay the invasion. Ever since that shocking revelation in the Fire Nation, the truth of Zuko's dual nature, Aang had been wary. Avatar Roku's warning on the solstice echoed in his ears, do not trust him. And yet, so far, the being who was both Zuko and Victor Crane had done exactly what he said he would. He'd freed them. He'd given them a path north. He was even, in his own twisted way, giving him this window to train. It was a game. Aang knew that much. But it was a game where the stakes were the fate of the world, and he was a key piece on the board. He couldn't afford to be a weak piece. He had to become a power unto himself, strong enough that when Zuko, or Victor Crane, or whoever he truly was finally showed his real face, Aang would be ready. He had to be the Avatar. With a new, steely determination hardening his heart, Aang turned and walked out of the igloo, heading towards the plaza where he had left a weary and worried Appa. High above, in a spire of the royal palace that overlooked the main plaza, a young woman of ethereal beauty sat by a window carved from flawless ice. Her hair was a cascade of silvery white, and her eyes held the deep, tranquil blue of a calm polar sea. She wore a gown of the finest blue silk, tailored to honor the generous, womanly curves of her body, the narrow waist, the gentle swell of her hips, and the ample bosom that was the subject of many a respectful bard's song in the north. This was Princess Yu, the mythic beauty of the Northern Water Tribe. She watched the scene below with a soft, curious smile. The great, shaggy bison was lying in the plaza, and a few brave, giggling children were now daring to approach, offering it chunks of frozen sea prune. Then, she saw the bald boy in orange and yellow robes emerge from the chief's igloo. He looked weary, but his step was purposeful. He saw the children with his bison, and for a moment, his solemn expression broke, replaced by a genuine, bright smile as he joined them, demonstrating how to scratch Appa's favorite spot behind the horn. So, he's your current life, Yu said, her voice a soft melody. He seems happy. He doesn't seem like you at all. A shimmering, translucent form coalesced in the air beside her. It was a tall, powerfully built young man with long, flowing dark hair and the stoic, handsome features of the Water Tribe, a ghost of a wolf-tail knot at his crown. This was Avatar Kuruk. He is happy, Kuruk said, his voice a low, resonant echo from the past. And excited. And he carries a burden I never had to at his age. Don't compare us. But you are him, you countered gently, turning her mesmerizing eyes from the window to the spirit. Isn't that the very principle of the Avatar cycle? You are reincarnated. You are the same soul. Kuruk's spectral form seemed to sigh. We are the same spirit, but we are not the same person. Rava passes on, but the human vessel, we are shaped by our environments, our eras. I was a different person from Avatar Yangchen, just as Kyoshi was a different force of nature from me. This boy, Aang, he is a product of peace, of the air nomad's teachings. It makes him different. Yu's brow furrowed in thought. How can you be different when you are, at your core, one and the same. I don't understand how the reincarnation truly works. A wry, almost sad smile touched Kurik's lips. Honestly, Princess? I don't know exactly how it works either. I'm just living it. Or, rather, I'm just watching it. Just then, a firm knock sounded at the chamber door. Princess Yu? Kurik vanished instantly, dissolving into the air like mist under the sun. Come in, Yu called, her posture straightening into one of royal grace. The door opened and Chief Arnuk entered, his face lined with the new worries of the day. Yu. I see you've observed our unexpected guest. I have, father, she replied softly. He seems very young and excitable, yet I can see he may be capable. He is, Arnuk agreed, his gaze drifting to the window where he could see Aang now practicing a simple airbending form for the delighted children. But he carries an old soul and a dire warning. We are to host a welcoming banquet for him and his companions this evening. I wish to see if you are feeling well enough to attend. Your presence would be a great honor for the Avatar. Yu was silent for a moment, her eyes lingering on the young air nomad below. A strange, fluttering feeling stirred in her chest, a mixture of curiosity and a deep, preordained pull. Of course, father, she said, a gentle, knowing smile gracing her lips. I would be delighted to attend. It is important to welcome the Avatar properly. Very good, Arnuk said, a hint of relief in his voice. He gave his daughter a final, fond look before turning and leaving the chamber, the door closing softly behind him. When she was alone again, Yu rose and walked back to the window. Aang was now attempting to teach the children an air scooter, much to their hilarious failure. A soft, private sigh escaped her lips. The time has finally come. I have waited a long time, she whispered to the silent, frozen city, one hand resting unconsciously over her heart. A very long time, to meet the one who holds my heart. The meaning of her words hung in the room, as mysterious and profound as the ocean depths, leading no one to know if she spoke of a destined love, a spiritual duty, or something else entirely. Chapter 100, Moon Princess and the Avatar. The heavy door of the chamber clicked shut, leaving Princess Yu alone once more. The gentle smile she had worn for her father faded, replaced by a thoughtful, faraway look. She stood at her window of flawless ice, but her gaze was turned inward, not on the city below. The silence in the room was deep, broken only by the faint, eternal whisper of the wind against the palace spires. A shimmering coolness gathered in the air beside her, and Avatar Kurik's form solidified once again. He did not look at the view. His spectral eyes were fixed on you, his expression unreadable but intense. You felt it too, Yu said softly. It was not a question. I am a part of him, and he is a part of this world, Kurik replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ice itself. A shift this large, it is like a great stone dropped into a pond. Every Avatar for 1,000 lifetimes would feel the ripples. Yu turned from the window, her silvery hair catching the pale light. The void I felt. The cold that was not cold. It was the same as in my dream. The same as when the other one touched that place. Kurik gave a slow, grave nod. The foreign soul. The one who wears the Fire Prince's skin. He is the stone. His very presence here is tearing at the fabric of things. They stood in silence for a moment, two beings connected to forces beyond the physical world, sharing a dread they could not fully name. The boy downstairs, Yu began, her voice hesitant. Aang. He is the hope of the world. He is the bridge. Should I go to him? Should I tell him what I know? What we feel? Kurik folded his translucent arms. And tell him what, princess? That you have bad dreams? That an ancient ghost feels uneasy? He is a child carrying the weight of a century of war. He has just seen his friend nearly die. He is surrounded by strangers in a city awaiting destruction. Would your whispers of a deeper, older fear help him? Or would they break him? Yu's shoulders slumped slightly. The logic was cruel but undeniable. So we do nothing? We wait for the storm to hit? I did not say that, Kuruk countered. I said, think carefully before you add your burden to his. Your role is different. You are the heart of this tribe, touched by the moon spirit itself. Your strength is not in frontal assaults. It is in wisdom. In patience. He floated closer, his form seeming to pulse with a faint light. You asked me before about the other one. The prince. You wondered if your path was tied to his as well. Yu's hand drifted to the necklace at her throat, a simple yet elegant carving of the moon. The pull I feel, it is not one, but two. Aang is like a gentle, persistent tide. But the other. He is a riptide, hidden beneath calm water. Stronger. Darker. More dangerous. She looked up, her blue eyes wide with a fearful curiosity. You told me I would meet them both. That I would have to choose what to protect. And that time is coming, Kuruk said. The Fire Nation fleet gathers. The boy trains. The pieces are moving. When the prince arrives, he will not come for a battle. Not the one they are all preparing for. He will come for something else. Something specific. The oasis, you whispered, a cold certainty settling in her stomach. The blessed water. Perhaps, Kuruk aloud. Or perhaps for the spirit that blesses it. Or perhaps, his gaze seemed to pierce through her, seeing the unique energy that pulsed within her own chest. For the one who carries a piece of that spirit in her very soul. Yu's breath caught. She had always known her connection to Tue was profound, a secret bond that had given her life when she was born still and silent. But to be a target for it. So what do I do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Do I confront the young avatar with a truth he cannot handle? Or do I wait in the shadows for the Storm Prince to arrive, knowing he may be coming for me? Kuruk's form began to gently fade, the conversation drawing to its close. You do what those of us connected to the spirits have always done, princess. You watch. You listen. You prepare. The banquet tonight is not just a formality. It is your first chance to look into the Avatar's eyes and measure his spirit. See if the boy is ready to become the man the world needs. See if the hope in him is stronger than the fear. He was almost gone now, a faint shimmer in the air. Do not seek out the storm, you. The storm is already coming to you. Your choice will not be in the seeking, but in how you stand when it finally arrives. And with those final, ominous words, Avatar Kuruk vanished completely, leaving the princess of the Northern Water Tribe alone with the weight of the future pressing down on her. She stood there for a long time, watching the sun begin its slow descent below the horizon, painting the icy towers of her city in shades of orange and violet. Down in the plaza, she could see the young Avatar, Aang, now sitting cross-legged beside his bison, likely meditating. Preparing. A strange calm settled over her. The uncertainty was still there, a cold knot of fear in her gut. But Kuruk was right. Her path was not one of frantic action. It was one of presence. Of guardianship. She would go to the banquet. She would meet the Avatar. She would be the gracious princess, the serene daughter of the chief. And she would wait. For the tide, and for the riptide. And when they both arrived, she would be ready to protect what was hers. A sharp, insistent knock rattled the heavy door of her chamber, shattering the profound silence Kuruk had left behind. The sound was not the respectful tap of a servant or the firm, paternal knock of her father. It was a rapid, impatient rapping that grated on the ears. Yu's serene composure fractured. A flicker of profound weariness crossed her face, and she closed her eyes for a brief second, as if gathering strength. She knew who it was before she even turned. She walked to the door and pulled it open. Standing in the hallway was Han. He was a tall, broad-shouldered warrior, his armor polished to a high shine, his wolf-tail headdress perfectly arranged. He was, by all accounts, a fine catch for any princess. Handsome, strong, and one of the tribe's most promising young fighters. But his posture was rigid with self-importance, and his smile was a little too practiced, a little too sure of itself. "Princess Yu," he said, his voice booming in the quiet corridor. He puffed out his chest slightly. "I have come to personally inform you of the banquet tonight. For the Avatar and his companions." He said the last word with a faint, dismissive tone, as if the idea of a banquet for a Water Tribe peasant girl and her injured brother was a tedious formality. Yu's expression remained politely neutral, but a coldness entered her eyes. "Thank you, Han. My father has already informed me." "Ah, good," Han continued, either missing or ignoring her chill. He leaned a hand against the doorframe, blocking her view of the hall. "I wanted to ensure you would be attending. It is important for the tribe to see us together. A show of unity and strength for our honored guest." The way he said us made her skin crawl. It was a claim, a statement of ownership. He was already acting as if the chieftainship was his, and she was its decorative prize. "I have already told my father I will be there," Yu repeated, her voice flat. She made no move to invite him in. The space between them was a wall of ice she had no intention of melting. "Excellent." Han's smile widened, still not catching her mood. "I will ensure you have an escort. The plaza may be crowded with commoners hoping for a glimpse of the air nomad. We cannot have you jostled." That was the final straw. The implication that she needed his protection in her own home, from her own people, was insufferable. Her patience, already frayed by the cosmic dread of her conversation with Kuruk, snapped. "I am perfectly capable of walking to my father's hall, Han," she said, her voice sharpening like a shard of ice. "And I have already given my answer. Now, if you will excuse me, I must prepare." Without waiting for a reply, she stepped back and pushed the heavy door shut. It closed with a firm, solid thud, cutting off his surprised face. She stood for a moment with her back against the cold wood, listening. She heard a faint, frustrated grunt from the other side, followed by the sound of his retreating footsteps, heavy and annoyed. Yu let out a long, slow breath, her shoulders slumping. The cosmic dread of a world-ending storm was, in its own strange way, easier to face than the mundane, suffocating certainty of a future with a man like Han. She pushed away from the door, a look of comic, profound exhaustion on her beautiful face as she went to choose a gown for the banquet. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 10. Peace.